And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Prof Show. Today is Thursday, April 2nd, 2026. And tonight's show is Delphi, the story told the court. And tonight we're going to be going over the untrue story told to the court in Delphi or the jury uh, in both opening and closing statements from the prosecution and the defense. So stay tuned, get yourself some refreshment or something like that, and we'll be right back momentarily after the introduction music. God bless.
Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Only need good vibes. Can't lie. Good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Been waiting so patient, I'm going places, can't fake it. My heart is so cold, my energy is contagious. All the pain, I can't take it. I'm staying grounded and graceful, cause I know everything that I've been through only made me count my blessings daily. Yeah, they've been acting shady, but I don't take it personal. The memories fading, I'm enjoying the moment. I've been smelling the roses, taking time to reflect, stepping back, the truth unfolding, unfolding. Got nothing to prove, cause I'm about to blow. I've been in the booth, speaking to my soul. You know that I'm true, either way it go, either way it goes. I cannot turn cold, staying on the low. I've been protecting my soul. If your intentions are not pure, I can't let you get too close, cause I'm vibrating high. Ain't got time for your ego, these niggas quit to turn me back. Acting like the amigos, they never cared in the shows. Wasn't with you at your lows, assuming that you gonna fold. But baby, I've been growing ever since I let you go. And I've been doing better, and I know that hurts to know. Hurts to know. Only good vibes around me, and that's for sure. Only good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Only need good vibes. Can't lie. Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. You see me searching for my inner peace. I've been learning more about myself and my purpose. Truth always come to the surface. Was hurting, but I had to heal. Releasing all the pain that I always held. Been going through some changes, I'll make it still. Protecting my soul to keep it real. Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes. Only need good vibes. Can't lie. Only need good vibes, good vibes, good vibes, good vibes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Let me say hello to everybody before we get too far into it. Those of you who are here early, and please do share this and let everybody know we're here. And if you're on the replay, share it anyway and let everybody know they should come check this out if they want to know some truth about what happened in the trial of Richard Allen regarding the Delphi murders. So let me say hello to Deb. Deb's our main mod. Please do respect her wishes in the chat, and she'll be nice to you. Also, Nana Chris, Christopher. Who else we got in here? Matt Payton for Baby Daddy. For Pit Bulls Across America, It's a New Day. Arthur Claremont. and I'm sure many more will be joining in momentarily. We're a little earlier than usual, but I had some things to do today. So, welcome in. Welcome in. Let's see. Tonight, okay. I've been thinking about this scenario here and what we witnessed in the trial against Richard Allen. And I guess my biggest takeaway is that everything's a lie. And when I looked into, if I look into social media now and all of the personalities out, there are many personalities out there who, for the longest in the lead up to trial, were pushing the guilt of Richard Allen. We call them the guilters or the bootlickers or the troll farm. They terrorized the community for years. They were trying to ensure a plea deal and the influencing of the potential future jurors in Delphi. And so we absolutely know that we were dealing with that contingent. And then additionally, we've been dealing with another contingent whom I call the Kronks or the controlled opposition. This appears to be either a contingent of federal operators over here ensuring that this truth about this case remain buried, or at a minimum, a PR contingent working on behalf of the state. Okay, that means the prosecutor's office most likely, or Indiana State Police, or some combination thereof. And a pattern that I've noticed with all of the above mentioned individuals is that they keep everything between the lines, and no matter how they might try to present themselves, um, everything, the box in which they're operating is totally within the state's narrative. Okay, the state's narrative. So it's very interesting that we have a contingent of people who are supposed to be truth tellers out here who are solely operating within the box of the state's narrative around this crime. It's absolutely insane because those of us who deep dive this case for years and even years prior to the arrest of Richard Allen, uh, we were never thinking in this box, as far as adhering to the state's timeline, adhering to the state's theory, adhering to the truthfulness of the witness statements, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's been an uphill battle, an ongoing battle to try to counter such a large contingent of people who are towing the line for the state in this case. And we've done a lot of work here, um, attempting to ask the right questions and to bring forward whistleblowers and information indicative of the broader story, the bigger picture of what happened here. And there's definitely a feeling that this ties into something way bigger than the murder of two girls. And that's a difficult scenario because as should be very clear to you with the Epstein files, it's very clear to me that that entire thing has been whitewashed or sanitized before it's began to be released. Because we know one thing, that the people in power, powerful individuals, have a lot to lose should the truth come out about who is benefiting from that scheme. And we feel it's a similar situation in Delphi. Should the truth be told in Delphi, it would mean a lot of bad things for a lot of bad people. And for that reason, there appears to be a massive cover up. And if you're new here, uh, spoiler alert, this is a massive cover up. Uh, and in order to engender a massive cover up, there must be something extremely important for some extremely important people to warrant this sort of cooperation, cover up, and this sort of expenditure of dollars. And keep in mind that this is largely taxpayer dollars here. So very likely we're in the realm of $5 million in my estimation, because we know the trial was in essence about $4 million, and I would assume there's been another entire $1 million on top of that in the years leading up, steering the public narrative, as well as uh, as well as the laundering aspect that must be going towards paying for this sort of effort. Um, with the exception that there are likely a bunch of CIs involved as well here. So, anyhow, with that being the spoiler alert in a nutshell, what I'm going to do tonight, we're going to take a very close look back at the opening and closing statements from both the prosecution and the defense in the trial of Richard Allen, because what I'm going to try to display to you is the fact that there was a fairy tale, an absolute fantasy world narrative that was told. And unfortunately, it wasn't just by the prosecutor. And you're going to see that tonight. And this is an absolutely insane story when you hear it, especially once you get yourself educated on the greater wealth of information out there about this crime. And so that's what we're diving into tonight. So let's not delay too much longer, because there's a lot to get through. Just give me a moment and I will pull up my files and do it a little differently tonight. So just give me a second here. Okay. All right. So let's get started. Now, tonight we are starting with the prosecution's take. So I thought the easiest to get through, although the most nauseating to get through, is the prosecutor's story here. But I think it's very necessary to walk through it and to refresh our memory. And keep in mind, many of us were not in the courtroom. So we're reliant upon the transcriptionist's uh, telling of this story and hoping that it's accurate, but not being able to fact check it. Because remember, there was a cloud of darkness cast over this case and a lack of transparency. So, unless you were sitting in the courtroom, you have no way of knowing how accurate any of this transcript is. And it's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. And we have a lot of questions about that. But the judge has ensured that even the audio recordings are not available. So there's absolutely no information whatsoever available except what the court has handed us. And that's a whole thing in and of itself. But we'll start with the story told by the prosecutor. Okay. And typically, for those of you who've been here before, I always put things up onto the screen because I like to prove to you that I am accurately relaying the things that I am relaying. I like to say that I am a person who's about receipts, but in this case, it's unnecessary, and I'd rather you listen along rather than attempt to read. And so, for anyone seeking this information is publicly available. Should you want to go see it for yourself, but trust that I'll be reading it verbatim tonight, because that's the goal here, is to tell the prosecutor's story, the state's story, the defense's story, which is also the state's story. So let's go on and get into it. So keep in mind that this is the absolute first and last things the jurors heard before they went in to deliberate, before they heard all the evidence, and then after they heard all the evidence, and before deliberation. So this is the box within uh, these jurors were operating. And you'll see after we're done that it's a very limited box. You know, it's a very small box, and it's absolutely insane. So let's dive in. So the prosecutor begins. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. I was hoping to show you a video, but it's not going to work out. A short few days ago, I told you this case was about a bridge guy, or about bridge guy, a bullet, and the brutal murder of two young girls. Now it's time for you to hear the rest of the story. How Richard Allen murdered Abigail Williams and Liberty German. I want to take you back to the February 13th of 2017, a day where everything changed for Abigail Williams and Liberty German. As we told you before, it was unseasonably warm that day in Carroll County. It was a nice summer day in the middle of winter, hint of spring, which was just around the corner. On top of that, Abigail and Liberty had the day off school, so they decided to go out to the trails, specifically out to the Monon High Bridge, to be outside, enjoy nature. Enjoy the weather, enjoy their day off school. Now, I told you before, the trails are a trail system in Delphi. There are trails that wind through the city. They go through various wooded areas and go all along across streams, rivers, and creeks. The Monon High Bridge is an abandoned train trestle. It's 60 feet above the Deer Creek. So the girls headed out to the trails. They asked Kelsey German to go with them. She wasn't able to. However, she was able to give them a ride. On the way to the trails, Liberty German snapped a picture of her and Abigail Williams in the back seat of Kelsey's car, laughing, joking. Kelsey dropped the two girls off at the entrance of the trails, what is known as the Mears entrance. They entered into the trails through this entrance, and they headed towards the Monon High Bridge. I want to tell you a little about Abigail Williams and Liberty German. First of all, from hearing me in court and hearing me speak, you know they commonly go by Abby and Libby, what they're commonly referred to. They were best friends. They were always together. They were really more like sisters than friends. To put it into perspective, out of the two of them, only Libby had a phone. But Libby and Abby's fingerprints put in her phone. No, Libby had Abby's fingerprint put in her phone so that Abby could use it anytime she wanted. They were both also students at Delphi Middle School. So they hung out together. They went to school together. They did everything together. They were best friends. As they went down the trail, Libby was on her phone like most teenagers. She was talking to friends, texting family. She was on Snapchat. She was able to look at pictures from other friends, posting her own pictures. And I know everyone knows what Snapchat is, but it's an app you have on your phone where you take a picture and you can post it online. The picture's up for a period of time, then it disappears. It's a pretty popular app for kids in this community. She did that as Abby and her walked down the trail towards the Monon High Bridge. I want to tell you a little bit about the bridge. Now, I had hoped the video was going to show the bridge, and maybe I'll be able to show you a video of it later, but it's a very high bridge. It's a very old bridge, and it's a very long bridge. Once you're on the bridge, there's nowhere to go. There's no rails. There's only a few platforms in certain places. If you had to escape and you were on the bridge, you'd have nowhere to go but to jump off. The railroad ties that hold together the bridge are falling apart. Some are broken, some are loose. Heck, even some of them are missing altogether. It's scary to cross and it's flat out dangerous. But again, as I told you a few days ago, middle school and high school kids in our community love to cross the bridge. Most just say they did it. I even did it when I was in high school. As they cross the bridge, Libby continues to use her phone, continues to take pictures and post them on Snapchat. Takes a picture of Abby, posts it on Snapchat. As they crossed the bridge, Libby went first and Abby followed. As Libby got to the end of the bridge, she waited for Abby. Libby continued to play on her phone. But as she got to the end, she looked back and she noticed a man following Abby. And something inside Libby told her that she needed to get her phone out and film the man following Abby. 2:13 p.m. is when she did that. The man follows Abby off the bridge to where Libby is standing. He then pulls out a gun and orders both girls down the hill. Those chilling words, girls down the hill, they complied against their will. And as this happens, the video on Abby's phone cuts off. On Libby's phone, cuts off. Imagine 13 and 14 years old. You're with your best friend. The weather's beautiful. You're off school. You decide to have some fun, go to the trails and cross the bridge, a local challenge in our community. While you're doing that, you're laughing, you're joking, you're posting pictures on Snapchat. But as you end the bridge, you notice a man following you. You get that chill, that feeling that you have when something isn't right. You pull out your phone and you took the video, the man, and as you do, your friend runs to your aid. The man approaches, pulls a gun, and orders you and your friend down the hill. Imagine the fear you would have, a gun pointed at you, being ordered down the hill against your will. Out of fear, the girls complied. They complied with his orders, not knowing what he wanted or what he was going to do to them, completely powerless. He had the power and the fear and forced them down the hill. Later that day, Derek German arrives at the trail to pick up the girls, but the girls are nowhere to be found. He calls other family members to assist, but no one can locate the girls. The police are called and a search is started. The search ensues for the girls until 2 a.m. on February 14th, and then it picks up again later in the morning at 6 a.m. As the search progressed through the day, the girls were ultimately found. Both were dead, 13 and 14 years old. They were found just upstream from the Monon High Bridge near the Deer Creek. You're going to see pictures of the scene. It was a gruesome scene. Libby was completely naked, covered in blood, with her throat cut in several places. Libby's blood was all over the ground in several places and even on one of the trees. Abby, she had on her own undershirt, but she had on Libby's sweatshirt and Libby's jeans. Abby had her shoes on, her own shoes on, but no socks. Her throat was also cut. The rest of the girls' clothes were found in the Deer Creek with the exception of two things. One of Libby's shoes and Libby's cell phone. They were found underneath the body of Abigail Williams. Also found at the scene was a lone bullet, an unspent bullet. Inches away from the bodies of Abby and Libby, specifically a Winchester .40 caliber bullet. The phone, along with the other items, were sent to be processed to see what evidence could be gathered, to see what they could find. On the phone were the last pictures taken of Liberty, of her and Abigail. Those pictures that Libby took while on the ride in Kelsey's car. There's also the videos that Libby took. The video at the end of the Monon High Bridge that showed the man that was following Abigail. That showed the man who kidnapped Abby and Libby. The man we know as Bridge Guy. As the investigation progressed, witnesses started to come forward with information. You're going to hear from 3 girls that were on the trail that day. Anna Spath, Rayleigh Voorhees, and Brianna Wilbur. And they were on the trail as well, taking pictures of nature with friends, laughing, joking. They stopped and took a picture at a bench just east of the Freedom Bridge. And right after that, they ran into a man along the trail and later described that man as walking with a purpose, but not very friendly. Most importantly, they're all going to testify that the man they saw on the trail that day is Bridge Guy. You're then going to hear from Betsy Blair. She came forward. She was on the trail that day as well. She uses the trail to exercise. She walks the loop on the trail for her exercise daily. She walked down to the Monon High Bridge, and when she got to the Monon High Bridge, she saw the male out on the first platform of the bridge. She'll testify the guy she saw is Bridge Guy from Liberty's video. You're then going to hear from Sarah Carbaugh, who said that she drove east on 300 North that day. She saw a man walking along the side of the road, and that man was muddy and bloody, like he had just slaughtered a pig. And she'll tell you the man she saw was Bridge Guy. Years passed, and through the years, investigators worked on the case. Included in the people working on the case was a gal named Kathy Shank. As she was reviewing old reports, she came across a report by a DNR officer, Department of Natural Resources, named Dan Doolin. And in 2017, he spoke to Richard Allen and he made a report. And when he spoke to Richard Allen in 2017, Richard Allen told him that he arrived at the trails at 1:30 and he was there until 3:30. And that while he was on the trail, he ran into 3 girls. Kathy immediately took this report to Tony Liggett, who was the detective at the time. You're going to hear Tony Liggett testify that the tip stuck out to him immediately because he knew that if he could find the man that ran into the three girls, they would be able to identify Bridge Guy. And so it immediately stuck out to him. Law enforcement immediately called Richard Allen. They interviewed him. Richard Allen admitted he was on the trail on February 13th, 2017, that he ran into the 3 girls on the trail. He also stated he was wearing a blue or black Carhartt coat, jeans, and fit the description of the man on the bridge. Also found out that he owned firearms. Investigators searched Richard Allen's house and they found a blue Carhartt jacket, several knives and box cutters, boots, and a .40 caliber gun with .40 caliber ammunition. The gun was sent to the lab and tested, and it was confirmed that the bullet at the scene was cycled through Richard Allen's gun. The bullet that was found between the 2 bodies of Abby and Libby. Richard Allen was brought in for a second interview. This information was put in front of him. He had no explanation for how his bullet ended up between the bodies. I don't know. The story could have ended there. Richard Allen was arrested, and while he was incarcerated, he confirmed what investigators knew, that he was the one that killed Abby and Libby. And it wasn't just one admission, it was several, some with details of the crime, how he did it, why he did it. And these weren't admissions he made while he was being interrogated or being tortured or even being asked questions by the police. These were admissions that he told his wife, his mother, unprovoked, admissions that were freely and knowingly made, admissions that had details that only the killer would know. You're going to hear those details. For 5 years, he lived in this community. He worked in this community. He hid in plain sight. The state is confident after you hear this evidence that you will be firmly convinced that Richard Allen is the man on the bridge that kidnapped Abby and Libby and then intentionally murdered them. That Richard Allen is the man on the bridge and that he used his gun to gain power over the 2 girls and force them down the hill. The words that he uttered to those girls, that he forced them down the hill and he was going to have his way with them. But he was interrupted. And we're going to talk to you and tell you about that interruption. And after which he forced them to cross the creek and he killed them. The evidence will show the last face the girls saw before their throats were slit was Richard Allen's face. The state believes that you'll be firmly convinced that he is the one that killed Abby and Libby. Thank you, Judge. Okay. So that was your prosecutor's opening statement. And here's how he closed. Ladies and gentlemen, February 13th, 2017 is a day that this community will never forget. It's the day that Abigail Williams and Liberty German went to the trails for a walk and never returned. The day that both of them were murdered by Richard Allen. 3 weeks or so ago, we told you that we would give you the evidence to convict Richard Allen. And the state has done just that. It's been a long trial, and so I want to go over a few of those pieces of evidence with you today. This all started on February 13th of 2017. Becky Patty was at home with Libby and Abby, had spent the night before. Both Abby and Libby were home off of school that day and playing around the house, playing with the new puppy that Libby had gotten not long ago. Abby and Libby had the idea to go to the trails. They asked their grandma, Becky, if they could go, and Kelsey offered to give them a ride. Last thing that Libby said to Becky was, "Grandma, it'll be okay." And they headed to the trail. On the way to the trail, they're on Snapchat. Libby was posting pictures. The plan was for them to go to the trail and then for Libby's dad, Derek, to pick them up later that day. Kelsey dropped them off at about 1:48 p.m. And we can tell that from the phone data that Libby's phone is unplugged at about 1:48, and shortly after, she's dropped off at the trail. Around 3 p.m. that afternoon, Derek arrives at the trail to pick up the girls, but he can't find them. He walks the trails. He goes to the Monon High Bridge. He calls Libby's phone several times, can't find the girls. At 3:30, Derek calls Becky and tells her that he can't find the girls and the families get involved in the search. Anna Williams is contacted. No one can find the girls. Sometime after 5, the family calls law enforcement to report the girls missing. We heard from Mitch Catrone, the first one to respond. He took the call. He was at the station when the call came in. He goes to 625 and proceeds down the private drive to look for the girls around the Monon High Bridge. He continues down the drive and goes to Brad Weber's house and speaks to Brad Weber. Brad Weber says, "Yeah, look around my property. Look all you want, no problem." He gives a quick search around the property but finds nothing. Other law enforcement join in. The fire department joins in. Family members, community members join in for the search, and the search goes till 2 a.m. on the 14th. And you heard from several of those searchers and the law enforcement officers. At this point, no one is looking for 2 dead bodies. They're looking for 2 girls. No one thought anything bad happened to Abby and Libby. That doesn't happen around here. It's a small community. These kind of things don't happen. The search resumes on the 14th, around 7 a.m. I thought it was 6. And it continues around noon until Pat Brown calls Steve Mullen And Steve Mullen notifies him that he found the girls. He found Abby and Libby. Oh, really? It wasn't Dustin Maggart? Okay. Deputy Giancola was the first one on the scene. When he arrived at the cemetery, he made his way down to the creek. He met with Pat Brown and other searchers, and they pointed to clothes in the creek. Clothes they had found, a shoe, a tie-dyed shirt. When he was speaking to members at the creek, they pointed back towards the cemetery to where the bodies of Abby and Libby were located. Deputy Giancola testified that he walked right past them and wasn't even able to see them from his vantage point, that they were hidden. He walked to where the bodies were and secured the scene. He didn't get too close, but he observed that both Abby and Libby were dead, that their necks were cut. And remember this point for later, that he testified that the Carroll County Sheriff's Department carried 9mm firearms, not .40 caliber. Once Giancola found the bodies or located the bodies, he called other law enforcement. Crime scene technicians arrived and they started to process the scene. They started to document the scene. They started to take pictures. They started to collect evidence. Now, these next pictures are hard to see, but this is what they saw. As they processed the scene, they did so carefully. Yet, what? No, they didn't. Addressing one girl and then the next, carefully documenting everything they found. They collected a phone that was underneath a shoe under the body of Abby, a phone that was covered in leaves and water and dirt. They also collected a bullet that was found between the bodies of Abby and Libby. The phone was immediately taken and processed. The information from the phone was extracted. From the phone, they found a video, the last video on the camera roll. We were able to determine from the download of the phone that the video was taken at 2:13 p.m. on February 13th, 2017. The video shows the moment Abby and Libby were kidnapped, the moment they were forced down the hill. Forced down the hill by the guy in the video, Bridge Guy. You can hear the fear in their voice, see the fear in Abby's face. He forced them down the hill with a gun he used to intimidate them, to scare them into doing what he wanted them to do. He used it to let them know that if they didn't comply, he was going to use that gun. You hear in the video, guys, then the racking of a gun down the hill. We know there's a gun involved from the girl's own words. That be a gun. We also know there's a .40 caliber bullet found at the crime scene between the bodies of the girls. And so law enforcement takes that video and they enhance that video. But before they do that, they take screenshots in an attempt to get a better look at Bridge Guy. These screenshots are in sequential order. The first one, you don't see Bridge Guy. The very next frame, you do. He continues to follow Abby, and something in Libby sensed, something in Libby told her that she needed to film this, that she needed to get out her camera and record this. And once the video was sent off and enhanced, this is what we found. And he plays the video. The enhanced video gives you a better image of what Libby recorded. The fact that Abby was being followed by Bridge Guy. The fact that he told them to go down the hill. The fear in Abby and Libby's voice. The fear in Abby's face. And so law enforcement began to interview people that were on the trail that day. They talked to Rayleigh Voorhees and Bree Wilbur. Heard from Bree Wilbur that when she came onto the trail, she began at Freedom High Bridge or Freedom Bridge, and she took a picture there at 12:25 p.m. That's when they got out on the trail, and they walked on the trail towards the Monon High Bridge. And when they got to the Monon High Bridge, it's about 12:43 p.m. And she took a picture when she got there. And then they turned and walked back towards Freedom Bridge. As they did, they talked. They took pictures, and near the end of their journey, they took a picture at a bench at 1:26 p.m. After that picture, Bree Wilbur testifies that she sees a man on the trail. You heard from Rayleigh Voorhees and Bree Wilbur. They both see the same man. They describe him as a creepy guy. He looked angry. He didn't respond or make eye contact, like he was walking with a purpose. We then heard from Betsy Blair. She was walking the trail that day, and she had a Fitbit on. And she told you that she went to the trail once, left to use the restroom, came back, walked to the Monon High Bridge, and when she got there, she noticed a man on the first platform on the bridge. She arrived at the trail around 1:45 and was there till about 2:15. She arrived at the Monon High Bridge around 2 o'clock. She testified she entered through the Mears entrance and went right to the Monon High Bridge. And again, as gets there, she sees a man on the bridge on the first platform, and she testified that he seemed to be watching for someone. As she turns around to walk back towards the Mears entrance, she passes Abby and Libby. Really? You then heard from Sarah Carbaugh. She was driving on 300 North at around 4 p.m. She sees a guy walking down the side of the road who was muddy and bloody. Looked like he had just slaughtered a pig. He avoids eye contact. His head is down. His hands are in his pockets. All the people interviewed that you heard from give a little bit different description of who they saw on the trail that day. But they are adamant. They are adamant the person they saw was Bridge Guy. Bridge Guy from the video on Libby's phone. There's no doubt in their mind. Bridge Guy who kidnapped Abby and Libby. Then we heard from Steve Mullen, who viewed the Hoosier Harvest Store video. He was able to observe Kelsey's car, Betsy Blair's car, Sarah Carbaugh's car, which confirmed the time they were at the trail. Kelsey German passes the Hoosier Harvest Store headed towards the Mears entrance at 1:49 p.m. Betsy Blair is heading back to the trails for his second trip at 1:46, and then she's leaving at 2:18. And then Sarah Carbaugh's vehicle is seen at 3:56. This video confirmed the times that those witnesses testified about when they were on the trail, when they saw Bridge Guy. The phone found at the scene was then further examined by First Sergeant Christopher Cecil. He did an extraction of the phone and a full analysis of what he found. He was able to locate health app data, Snapchat information, location data, more information about the video. And from this information, we know that Abby and Libby got to the trail around 1:48 p.m. And we know from each time that Libby logs onto Snapchat that it gives a GPS location of where she's at. And First Sergeant Cecil testifies that they will track that as they go down the trail towards the Monon High Bridge. And the health app data confirms that there's movement, that they're moving as they get to the trails. He then analyzes the video. We know from the video again that it was taken at 2:13 p.m. on February 13th. And he talks about the GPS location of that video. And it shows that it's at the Monon High Bridge. So we're able to map Libby's location, where she goes until the end of the Monon High Bridge. And we show movement until 2:32 p.m. The phone stops moving, doesn't move after that, registers no movement on the health app data. So where are we at that point? Can you bring the map up, please? So I want to go over the timeline we have up to this point. 12:25, Bree Wilbur arrives at Freedom Bridge. She and the other girls are walking towards Monon High Bridge. 12:43, Bree Wilbur arrives at the Monon High Bridge and takes a picture, and that picture's time-stamped. They then turn around and head back towards Freedom Bridge. At 1:26, Bree Wilbur takes a picture at the bench on the trail somewhere in this area, and indicates on the map. After that, they run into Bridge Guy. Betsy Blair passes the Hoosier Harvest Store on the way to the Mears entrance at 1:46, and she begins her walk towards the Monon High Bridge. She gets to the Monon High Bridge, turns around, and heads back to the Mears entrance. We know that Kelsey's car is headed this way at 1:48, right after she drops off Libby and Abby at the Mears entrance. So Libby and Abby start their walk down toward the Monon High Bridge. 2 o'clock, Betsy Blair reaches the Monon High Bridge. She sees the man on the first platform. She turns around and heads back to the Mears entrance. And as she does, she passes Abby and Libby. Really? Really? Abby and Libby proceed out onto the Monon High Bridge. We know this from the phone information and the Snapchat GPS location. And then at 2:13, the video begins. The video that Liberty took with her phone. The video that shows them being kidnapped by Bridge Guy. And then at 2:32, the phone stops moving. We then know Sarah Carbaugh, traveling to the west on 300 North, sees a guy that's muddy and bloody, like he just slaughtered a pig. And she passes the Hoosier Harvest Store at 3:56. Actually, I think Sarah Carbaugh's going this way. I apologize. So she passes the Hoosier Harvest Store at 3:56 and then sees Bridge Guy, who is muddy and bloody. So at this point, we know that Bridge Guy is on the video that Liberty took, and that he's the one who kidnapped Abby and Libby, and that after that, they're dead. So if we can determine who Bridge Guy is, we can determine who killed Abby and Libby. Bridge Guy is guilty of felony murder. In the act of kidnapping, Abby and Libby died. He's guilty of felony murder. So fast forward to 2022. Kathy Shank comes across a lead form. She's a volunteer who's assisting with organizing the numerous tips and files that were involved in this investigation. She comes across this lead sheet from Dan Doolin, and it sticks out to her. It immediately strikes her as something she's not seen before, something that's not been followed up on. She found a lead sheet about a man who was on the trail on February 13th between 1:30 and 3:30, and that man had run into the girls on the trail, Bree Wilbur and Rayleigh Voorhees. Kathy immediately took this tip to Tony Liggett. This tip stuck out to Tony Liggett because he knew that who the girls had run into was Bridge Guy. And if we could find Bridge Guy, we could find the killer. And all the indications pointed to this being Bridge Guy. So Tony Liggett got with Steve Mullen and began to follow up on this tip. This tip identified the man who was on the trail on February 13th between 1:30 and 3:30 as Richard Allen. So they tried to verify the information. They called in Dan Dulin. They look at his reports. He typed up a narrative from what he had found that day. He downloaded a BMV picture of Richard Allen. Steve Mullen went to the Harvest store. This information he found in the BMV that Richard Allen owned a 2016 black Ford Focus. And from your questions, we were able to determine that that is the only 2016 black Ford Focus registered in Carroll County in 2016 and 2017. So Steve Mullen goes to the Hoosier Harvest Store video, and he finds a car that matched the description of the car owned by Richard Allen. Stop. Shoot. Oh gosh. Lost my place. Okay. Tony Liggett then goes to CVS, where Richard Allen works, and he takes pictures of that car. And they compare those pictures to what they find on the Hoosier Harvest Store. And Steve Mullen testified that one clue that he was able to recognize is those wheels on the car. The fact that light is emitted through the wheels on the car. And he testified that this car matches the description of Richard Allen's 2016 black Ford Focus. The timestamp on the Hoosier Harvest Store video, 1:27 p.m., falls in line with what Richard Allen told Dan Dulin in 2017. He got to the trails around 1:30. So October 13th of 2022, Steve Mullen and Tony Liggett called Richard Allen in for an interview. You got to see the entire interview. You got to see it for yourself. Richard Allen confirms that on that day he was wearing the same clothes that bridge guy was wearing on February 13th, 2017. Confirmed that he's wearing a blue or black Carhartt jacket, jeans and boots. He confirms that he was on the trail that day, and he actually says, I went not only on the trails, but out onto the Monon High Bridge, out to the first platform. Exactly what Betsy Blair told you. He also states that he didn't see anybody else on the trail except for the 3 girls that he ran into. Didn't see any other males, didn't see any other group of girls, just those 3 girls. Now, in his interview, he did change his time. Instead of 1:30 to 3:30, he changed it from 12:30 to 1:30. And he's cooperating. And as the interview goes on, he becomes more aggressive. He becomes more hostile. As the investigators start to confront him with evidence, he becomes angry. He refuses to let them search his phone. He refuses to let them search his house. And then asked if Bridge Guy's him. He states, well, if that picture's taken with the girl's phone, it's not me. Based on the information law enforcement had at that point, they got a search warrant and searched his home. In his home, we found a 2016 black Ford Focus. You can see the light emitting through the rims. Steve Mullen said that was important in identifying the car in the Hoosier Harvest Store video. Also find several knives and box cutters. Find a blue Carhartt jacket. Surprise, surprise, same jacket Bridge Guy's wearing. Find various cell phones. Find a Hope box with a .40 caliber Winchester bullet in it. Again, same brand and caliber found at the crime scene between the 2 girls in a Hope box filled with mementos, pictures, keepsakes. Also find a .40 caliber Sig Sauer firearm, same caliber as the bullet fired. Bullet found at the crime scene between the 2 girls. Bridge Guy starter kit, blue Carhartt jacket, .40 caliber Winchester round in the Hope box, .40 caliber 6-hour gun. Now, Richard Allen did have other .40 caliber ammunition in his house, but that brand was Blazer. The only Winchester, Smith & Wesson Winchester round he had in his house was in a Hope box with other mementos and other keepsakes. Again, the same brand and caliber of the round found at the crime scene. Also found pictures where he often visited the Monon High Bridge. He's familiar with the area, visited oftentimes with his family. Through the search, we found a lot of electronic devices. We searched those devices. First Sergeant Christopher Cecil told you he searched several or extracted several of Richard Allen's devices. But one that was missing was the phone that he had in 2017. We know that because Dan Doolin took down the identification number for that phone. And all the phones we searched in the house when we searched in 2022, none of them matched that phone. But in some of those photos, we found a Google search from Richard Allen from April 17th of 2022. He searches Delphi, Indiana News at 10:47 p.m. And immediately after that, he searched for should I die now? Die now? Should I die now? And again, should I die now? The gun is sent to the lab to be tested. It's tested by Melissa Oberg. She's got 16 years of experience with the Indiana State Police lab on testing firearms. She's able to conclude that the bullet found at the scene between the two girls was cycled through Richard Allen's .40 caliber Sig Sauer firearm. That the ejector marks, the extractor marks, and the chamber face all matched Richard Allen's gun. That the bullet from the scene came from Richard Allen's gun. Now, through the investigation, she examined all types of guns. She testified about that. And she was not able to conclude that the bullet found at the scene was cycled through any of those guns except Richard Allen's gun. Oh, and her results were verified 3 times by her boss, who's the former president of AFTE. We've heard a lot about AFTE. One more thing, she testified in her career that she'd never been wrong. See how the pieces are starting to fall into place? See how the evidence is starting to confirm and reaffirm that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy? Not only do we have him on the trails at the time, now we have a bullet that ties him to the crime scene. So Richard Allen comes back for an interview on October 26th of 2022. He confirms, I've never loaned my gun out to anybody. I've never loaned my ammunition out to anybody. I've never loaned my car or my clothes out to anybody. States he'd never been mushroom hunting in the area where the girls were found. He has no explanation of how his bullet from his gun ended up between the bodies of Abby and Libby. 6 inches from Libby's foot. There is no explanation except the bullet came from his gun when he racked the gun to intimidate the girls right before he killed them. That's the explanation. Much like he racked it on the top of the Monon High Bridge when he forced them down the hill. He was using his gun as a way to force the girls to comply with what he wanted them to do. He was using that power over the girls. And you saw he was confronted with these things. He became angrier and angrier. And then his wife was brought in, and you saw that interaction with him and his wife, and you saw how he tried to manipulate her. You know I didn't do this. He tried to convince her. At the end of that interview, he's arrested. And so at this point in the investigation, we're able to place Richard Allen at the bridge at the time when the girls were kidnapped and able to confirm that he is Bridge Guy and that he ordered the girls down the hill. Further able to confirm that he racked his gun and lost a bullet at the location where the girls were murdered. Now, when he's arrested, he's moved to the Department of Correction for his safety. You heard Dr. Martin testify to keep him safe. That was our goal. Safe from himself and safe from other inmates. He was moved there and eventually he was sent to Westville Correctional Facility. And that could have been the case. That could have been all that we have here to present you today. But it's not, because once he gets to Westville, he starts to confess. But before he does that, on April 2nd of 2023, he has a phone call to his mom where he confesses he's given himself to Jesus. He's found the Lord, and it's important for him to tell his mom this, not only to tell his mom, but to make sure that his mom tells Kathy, his wife. The very next day, a phone call to Kathy. I did it. I killed Abby. I killed Libby. I killed Abby and Libby. They played the phone call. The phone call that he made to his wife, unprovoked, unpressured, of his own free will. Kathy, I did it. I killed Abby. I killed Abby and Libby. After that, he continues to confess. He writes a letter to the warden. I'm ready to confess to killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry. He then meets with Dr. Walla on April 5th of 2023. Dr. Walla writes down that Richard Allen says, I killed Abby and Libby. I'm sorry, and proceeded to cry. And he cried off and on throughout the session. He reported committing the murders on his own. He stated he made sure they were dead because he didn't want them to suffer. He reported not knowing why he did it, but stated he knew his intentions were sexual in nature. I don't think I had sex with them, he stated, but also said if he did, he didn't remember. He mentioned not knowing the ages of the victims, but reported they were at least 18 or 19 years of age, but could have been as young as 11. He reported being selfish all his life and being a coward, and he got scared and took their lives in order to preserve his own. He stated again he hoped he could apologize to the families of the victims and wish he could go back and change his actions. And then we heard from Dr. Walla that on that day, no odd behavior until after his attorney visits. And the sudden shift in presentation was purposeful, and that he was not suffering from psychosis when he made this admission. He goes on several confessions. You're going to be able to read these. But on April 7th of 2023, a door sheet, God, I'm so glad nobody gave up on me after I killed Abby and Libby. I, Richard Matthew Allen, killed Abby and Libby all by myself. Nobody helped me. I'm not crazy. I'm only acting like I'm crazy. On April 8th, from the door sheet, I'm ready to confess. I swear to God, I killed Abby and Libby. April 9th, I killed Abby and Libby. Funniest joke is how I killed them. I got what I deserved for what I did, and I hope I burn in hell for what I did. April 22nd, I killed those girls, so I have to kill myself. April 23rd, I killed Abby and Libby. My wife wasn't involved. I would like to confess. April 26th, I killed Abby and Libby. April 29th, he said he killed the girls in Delphi with a box cutter that he stole and left in the trash at CVS. That he wants to write a confession and that was only planning to rape them, but he got scared and panicked and killed them instead. He then meets with Dr. Walla again on May 3rd of 2023, and he gives an even more detailed confession. Allen reported wanting to confess to his crimes, and he wanted to tell his story. He reported seeing his parents the morning of the crime. He was supposed to go eat lunch with them, but he opted out and bought himself a six-pack. He drank 3 of those beers and finished the rest later. He said, I bundled up. Once I got to the trail, I laid in wait. He reported seeing the girls and following them on the bridge. He reported doing something with his gun and stated, "I think that's where the bullet fell out. I ordered them down the hill." His intention was to rape the girls. He saw a van, and that scared him and caused him not to follow through with raping the girls, but instead forcing them to cross the creek and then cutting their necks. He indicated again, "I wanted to make sure they were dead." He reported covering the bodies with tree branches, and he exited the area by keeping off the trail as not to be seen. He then returned to his vehicle, which was parked at a nearby building, and continued living his life after time passed because he hadn't been caught. We get to May 10th. You have a phone call to Kathy. "I need you to know that I did this. It's okay, honey. I did it. I killed Abby." Then May 17th, the phone call you heard to his mom. "I'm just worried you guys aren't going to love me because of the fact I said that I did it. Mom, I wouldn't sit here and tell you that I did it if I didn't." And they play the phone call. And he says, again, a phone call that's unprovoked. He does it of his own free will, not suffering from psychosis. The phone call shows that he also trusts Dr. Walla, his therapist, and he's meeting with her every day. Every day. After this, he continues to confess, to admit that he killed Abby and Libby. Another phone call, June 5th, to his wife. June 18th, "You know why I'm here. I killed Abby and Libby." June 21st, and then finally February 4th, when he's moved to Wabash Correctional Facility. He is sorry for killing the girls. Now, during these times, the time he's making these confessions, we heard testimony from Brian Harshman that he's listening to all these phone calls. He's watching the videos from Westville and from Wabash and from Cass County, and he's listening to Richard Allen as he makes these confessions to his mom and wife. He also reads over the reports from Dr. Walla. 2 reports that I showed you earlier, 2 reports that include confessions and details of those confessions, and he said he listened to over 700 phone calls. He reviews all the reports, reviewed those phone calls, and as he's going through Dr. Walla's report, he notices something, a detail he didn't know before, a detail that wasn't in police reports, that wasn't put out, a detail about Richard Allen being scared after he saw a van, a detail only the killer would know. So he followed up on it. He thought Richard Allen may have seen that van on 625 and specifically the private drive where 625 turns into the private drive. As we said, that private drive leads to the home of Brad Weber. That's the only home it leads to. So he started to do some research and he looked up Brad Weber's B&B information from 2017 and he found that he owned a van from February of 2017. And so Steve Mullen and Brian Harshman, they called Brad Weber in for an interview. They wanted to follow up on this information. Before that, they noticed that Brad Weber had given an interview back on February 17th of 2017, where he said he was at work that day on February 13th of 2017 until 2:02 p.m. And then he clocked out. He got home sometime around 2:30. When they re-interviewed Brad Weber, he said the same thing, clocked out at 2:02 and got home sometime around 2:03 to 2:30. You even heard Brad Weber testify twice that he left work at 2:02, went straight home, and got home sometime around 2:30. You also heard from Brad Weber that on that day, February 13, 2017, he was driving his van and that the route he took to his house was down that private drive. And that when he would have been on that private drive is the exact time Richard Allen would have been there with the 2 girls, the exact time. That is the van he saw that spooked him. Something only the killer would know. And Richard Allen confessed to it with Dr. Walla. Finally, let's not forget that Brian Harshman, in listening to these over 700 phone calls, he got a feel for Richard Allen's voice. He told you that when Richard Allen was talking on the phone with his mom and his wife. The rate, his demeanor, his tone was all the same when he made the confessions as when he's talking about mundane, everyday things. Finally, he told you, as part of his investigation, he watched the video from Liberty German's phone and he watched it dozens of times. And he told you on the stand there that there is no doubt in his mind that the voice on the video is Richard Allen's, that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy. And now all the pieces are clear. All the pieces are put together. So what does the state have to prove? Count one is murder. The defendant, Richard Allen, killed Abigail Williams while committing or attempting to commit kidnapping, which is defined as the person who knowingly or intentionally removes another person by force or threat of force from one place to another. Richard Allen is Bridge Guy. Richard Allen used his gun to force the girls down the hill. He kidnapped them and later murdered them. We call this felony murder. The murder is committed during the commission of a felony. That's what Richard Allen did. Count two is the same, but with Liberty. He not only forced Abigail down the hill, he forces Liberty down the hill. Count three, the defendant knowingly or intentionally killed Abigail Williams. He slit their throat. He wanted to make sure they were dead, and he left behind his calling card, a bullet from his gun. Count four, murder. Again, knowingly or intentionally killed Libby. February 13th, 2017, a day that started out like any other day. A day where Libby decided to go to the trail with her best friend, Abby, and enjoy being outside, but a day that Bridge Guy stole their youth and the life away from both Abby and Libby. The state showed you that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy. Richard Allen went on the trail that day with his .40 caliber Sig Sauer that he arrived around 1:30, that he ran into Bree Wilbur and Rayleigh Voorhees, and that he was grumpy, creepy, and walking with a purpose, and that as he continued down the trail, he went out on the Monon High Bridge to the first platform, and that's where Betsy Blair sees him. She sees him on the Monon High Bridge on the first platform, and she testifies he's waiting there for someone. And as she returns to the mirror's entrance where she came in, she passes Abby and Libby on their way to the Monon High Bridge. Richard Allen lies in wait. He waits for Abby and Libby, and then he follows them across Monon High Bridge. And as Libby reaches the end of the bridge, she looks back and sees Abby is being followed by Richard Allen. Something in Libby causes her to turn the phone on and record the man following Abby. Some feeling. She sensed this wasn't right. Richard Allen approaches the girls. He racks his gun and he orders them down the hill, and they say, "That be a gun." Okay, I added that part. There was nobody else on the trail that day during that time that matches the description of Bridge Guy except Richard Allen. We also know from Brian Harshman that Richard Allen is the voice on the video. We know from the hard data from the phone that from the video that Libby took was at 2:13 p.m. at the end of the Monon High Bridge. Richard Allen used his gun and his power, and he forces those girls down the hill. As they go down the hill, his intention is to rape them. We know that when he gets to the bottom of the hill, there's a pause. He begins to have his way with them. If you take a look at the health app data, there's a pause in the movement for 7 minutes. He has 7 minutes with them. But before he can finish his deed or deeds, he sees a van. Brad Weber's coming home from work down his private drive to his home, and he scares Richard Allen. Then Richard Allen forces the girls across the creek to a spot in the woods, a secluded spot, and he kills them. He cuts their neck. Libby is completely naked. Abby's naked at one time, but when she's found, she's dressed partially in Libby's clothes. Once he got them to the woods, he used his gun again, and he racks his gun and he drops a bullet And then it happens. He cuts Libby's throat first. And as she clings to life, she's grabbing for her throat, struggling to stay alive. We heard from Pat Cicero, and you saw in the picture. She begins to cry, and there's blood outlined in a tear. And then he focuses his attention to Abby, and he cuts her throat, and he watches her die slowly. He then crawls out of the woods and walks back to his vehicle down 300 North like nothing happened. Sarah Carbaugh saw him, and he said he was muddy, bloody, like he just slaughtered a pig. And for 5 years, he lives in this community. 5 years he lives amongst us. But what he doesn't realize is that he left behind a cartridge from his gun, cartridge that was cycled through his gun. But he also left behind Libby's cell phone. Those two key pieces of evidence led investigators to him. And then finally, if that wasn't enough to convince you, we have his confessions, where he states over and over and over again, I killed Abby and Libby. And then he goes into detail how he does it, what his mindset is when he's doing, and walks you through what he does to those girls. And in at least one of those admissions, he gives you detail that only he could have, only the killer would know. And so I believe the evidence firmly convinces you that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy and that he killed Abigail and Liberty. I'm going to ask you to consider all the evidence and enter a conviction of guilty against Richard Allen on all 4 counts. Counts 1 and 2 for felony murder, and counts 3 and 4 for murder. Thank you. And that is our prosecutor's narrative that is full of lies and misrepresentations, bending of truth, conflating of witness statements, filled with false evidence, a fictional timeline, a fictional scenario, coerced confessions made under a period of unconstitutional confinement and deep psychosis. That is the fictional narrative that Gray Hughes formulated years ago by reverse engineering and trying to make fit the families and witnesses' statements. And it's this YouTuber's narrative and timeline, so carefully constructed, that the prosecutor decided to go with, and that they were able to bully witnesses into agreeing to, manipulate data, exclude exculpatory information, and torture Richard Allen into confessing to. But it gets worse. Because the defense fails just as grossly. And that's what we'll get into now. So you've heard the whole prosecution's story. And now it's time to hear the defenses. Just give me a moment to pull it up. Okay, let's get there. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. We'll start with Mr. Baldwin. Richard Allen is truly innocent. Truly innocent. And when a man is truly innocent, there will be reasonable doubt from the evidence and from the lack of evidence. It may be hard to believe what you hear, but we ask you to wait. Because in this case, you're going to find out that the evidence and the lack of evidence shows that Richard Allen is actually innocent and that therefore there is reasonable doubt. We want the truth to come out in this courtroom for the families and for you all, most importantly. So I'm going to preview that evidence you're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. It starts out, you're going to find out that this case and the investigation was messed up from the beginning to the middle and as recently as the last couple of days. The beginning, you'll find out that evidence was lost and evidence is gone. Poof. Steve Mullen was in charge of that evidence. We're talking about the important evidence that happens right after they start an investigation. We're talking about evidence of interviews of key witnesses that are gone forever. And Richard Allen and his defense team will never, ever get to see that evidence, and neither will you. We're talking about evidence they don't even know who they interviewed because they didn't even bother to write down the names of the people that were interviewed. And we're talking about days and days and days of evidence right after the murder. And that wasn't all. Then a month later, they lost more evidence. From April 29th to June 2nd, they lost interview after interview after interview that you will never see. Richard Allen will never have the benefit of looking at, and neither will you. You'll find out that the defense didn't even learn about that stuff until very late. We had been asking for it. That's the beginning. In the middle, you're going to find out that the state of Indiana kicked out the FBI. They were having some turf wars. You'll hear about that. Kick them out. That's going to be a problem. You're going to find out because they not only kicked out the FBI, but their digital forensic people. You're going to find out that their digital forensic people had been given Libby's phone, the extractions from that. And before the FBI had a chance to talk with the state police about their findings, if they had any, they were kicked out. And that's going to be a major problem. You'll find out in a moment. And then most recently, 2 days ago, you're going to find out that law enforcement is scrambling a bit. Some of you on one panel, I didn't talk about it, but I did on the other. There is hair found in Abby Williams' hand. A strand of hair was found around her fingers with a root and DNA that can be extracted from the root. And DNA was extracted from that root. And the DNA analysis, her name is Bazinski, Stacy Bazinski. And she will be testifying that it might be from a relative of Libby. We know that it's not Libby's hair. It's not Libby's hair because the DNA is not from Libby. We know that it's not Abby's DNA, it's female hair. And all we need to know, whether it's a family member or not, you'll find out all that we need, Stacy will tell you, is to test the mom or the grandma or the sister of Libby. And once we do that, we'll know whether it's a family member or somebody else, and it could be either. And after I give my mini opening, they scrambled because in 7 years, they never turned over the sister or mother's DNA over to that lab to find out whose hair that might be. That's even now. I hope they get that result back of DNA so the truth can come out in this courtroom. Truth, believe it or not, can come out in a phone. These phones, they don't lie. The forensic data on these phones doesn't lie. It doesn't cheat. It doesn't have emotion. You're going to hear all this. That data is hard, and the data is the data. And when you find out what is on Libby's phone is what I'm talking about, the phone that was found under Abby, their case is going to start to fall apart right in front of your very eyes. There's a couple of guys from the state police who are nice fellows. Their name are Brian Bunner and Chris Cecil. You're going to like them, I think. They're in charge of analyzing the phone dumps. You're going to like them. They're in charge of analyzing. I'm sorry, I read that. You're going to get the phone dumps and extractions, things like that. They're in charge and have been in charge of understanding the data, the hard data that doesn't lie off Libby's phone. What you're going to find out is, sadly, they were ill-equipped to understand the data. We'll talk about that in a moment. Chris Cecil will tell you that the data from the phone dump is accurate and reliable. And we're happy about that because this data will be incredibly important in your deliberations as you follow the case evidence. Well, I think it's important that I tell you what the state's theory is. They kind of previewed it. What I want to do is I'm going to ask you that they be held to their theory because I think they're going to have to change their theory after this case starts evolving in front of you. Their theory is that Richard Allen will strike that. We'll start with Libby and Abby. Abby and Libby were on the ground in the woods at 4 o'clock, at the latest 4 o'clock, that they were deceased and on the ground at 4 o'clock on the 13th. That's a Monday. It's a Monday the 13th. And at 5 o'clock, their bodies didn't move. 6, 7, 8 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m., their bodies are still there this is their theory. 6 a.m., noon, those bodies didn't move. They were there from the 13th, at least 4 o'clock, they will say. Probably they're going to say more like 3:30, all the way up till the time when their bodies were recovered. That's their theory. The phone, Libby's phone, they're going to say was under that body, under Abby Williams' body at 3:30 p.m., 4 p.m., Monday the 13th, 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 8 p.m., midnight, 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 6 in the morning, all the way up till the bodies were recovered on around noon on the 14th. Tuesday the 14th. That's what their theory is. The phone never moves. That's their theory. Hard data. Richard Allen. What's their theory about Richard Allen? Their theory is Richard Allen is that he arrived at the trails, parked at the CPS lot. You're going to hear a lot about the CPS lot. I got to try to recreate what you're going to find out. So as you're heading down 300 North, that's the road that takes you to the CPS lot, which is one place where cars park when they want to get on the trail. And Mears lot that you just heard about is a little bit farther down. So as you're driving down 300 North, this is the CPS lot. You can park there. Then you can cut over to Monon Hybrid or the Monon Trail. It's about 100 yards or something. And so you're a little bit back farther on the trail, or you can continue to drive and head onto the Mears entrance. Now you're about halfway down the trail. And the trail kind of runs parallel to 300 North. And then you go down about 50 yards and you'll be at the trail. And that's what the state's theory is. That Richard Allen drove this way, which is not a normal way that he would ever drive. And you'll learn about that. It won't even make sense that he drove that way. But that's what they need to be the case, because you'll find out why. But he drove this way and then parked past the Mears entrance and parked at the CPS entrance at 1:30. This is their theory. and 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock. Now think about what's going on at this time in their theory. Abby and Libby are being abducted and murdered. 3 o'clock, 3:30, Richard Allen's car, they say, is parked right here at CPS lot. 3:45, 4 o'clock. Their theory is that Richard Allen's car is parked, and then sometime around 4 o'clock, Richard Allen leaves. That's their theory. You'll also find out that their theory is that once Richard Allen, and this is important, once Richard Allen left, he didn't take their phone. He didn't take Libby's phone, hard data on it, and never came back to the crime scene. And they're going to say that that's all going to be important. So that's what they say is what happened with Richard Allen, with the phone, and with Abby and Libby. What is the defense theory based upon evidence? Well, let me go through the evidence and tell you what the defense theory is based on that evidence. Just a moment. Okay. Sorry about that. Richard Allen was never on the trail at the same time with those two girls. All this identification business, these girls and all that list of who that is, you're going to see even Rayleigh Voorhees and all those people. They're talking about some guy that's 5'11", doesn't really meet the description of 5'5" Richard Allen. You'll make your own decisions on the value of their testimony. Richard Allen was gone by 1:30, and he had been on the bridge, on the trail toward the bridge, 12:30. He's gone by 1:30. Now, we know for a fact that you'll learn this from the evidence that his car is gone by 2:15 p.m., okay? Remember, think about this video is at 2:13. His car is gone out of that CPS lot. And if his car is gone, he's gone. How do we know that? What is that evidence going to be about that? Well, Betsy Blair, you've heard her name a second ago. She's going to be an incredibly important witness for you all. Betsy Blair, you're going to like her. Betsy Blair is going to testify that when she drove by the CPS lot at 2:15, we know that she drove by the CPS lot right around this time because there's a camera that shows her between the CPS lot and Mears lot, right in between. There's a camera off the Hoosier Harvest Store. That's going to be another important thing that you guys are going to be hearing about. The Hoosier Harvest Store will help give us some tent poles of times when things happen. And so we know from Betsy Blair, you're going to find this out, when she traveled past that camera, that 30 seconds or so later, she's going to be at the CPS lot. And when she testifies, you'll hear her tell you what vehicle she saw at the CPS lot at 2:15. Again, remember, their theory is of happening. Remember what their theory is of what is happening at 2:15. Richard Allen has abducted the girls already. The car should be there. His car should be there. Well, was his car there? Here's what Betsy Blair will testify to. My dad used to, when I was a kid, he had a Comet. She thought it was a Ford Comet, but it was a Mercury Comet. In the 60s, it's one of these old-timey cars, You see them out on the road sometimes, and you're like, whoa, look at that car. And it's very angular. It's got some real crisp, angular angles and lines. And she looked at it, and she had a blast from the past. Wow, that looks just like, that's how she remembered it. Richard Allen's car, they say he was driving a 2014 or something Ford Focus. Looks nothing like a Comet. You'll see. That's the vehicle that Richard Allen was not driving, but somebody else apparently was. Richard Allen was gone by that time. That's why Betsy Blair did not see Richard Allen's car. She saw her Mercury Comet, something that looked like a Mercury Comet, and she will testify to that. And you'll hear Steve Mullen. When he's asked about that, if he's consistent, he'll say, I don't know how to account for that. There's reasonable doubt on this case. Well, what does the evidence show about what happened to those girls? What evidence is there we can have to understand what happened to those girls? What will you be seeing in this case? Well, I think you're going to hear from, even today, from Becky Patty, who's the grandma, and that she and Derek German, the dad, they all live together. You're going to find out what they were doing early in the day on Saturday. I'm sorry, Monday the 14th. Okay, they might even tell you what they were doing on Saturday and Sunday, but they're definitely going to tell you what they were doing on Monday the 13th. They had breakfast. They talked a little, and then at some point in time, Kelsey German, who's now Kelsey Siebert, will drive Abby and Libby to the trail. And I think she's going to testify today. And we know because of the Hoosier Harvest Store camera that Kelsey dropped them off at the Mears lot there, then drove past the camera. That's about 1:49 p.m. roughly. The girls were dropped off about 1:47, which is going to be a few minutes before or after Betsy Blair got there. You'll find that out. Betsy Blair and the girls, they were following. The girls basically came in right after Betsy. And then Kelsey drove this way. She's on camera, and we know what time the girls got there. And then you'll find out that the girls walked down to the trail to the bridge, down the trail to the bridge. And the trail is straight. And when you get, it's like, it's like trails, like in maybe your community, you'll notice there's asphalt and maybe, I don't know, this wide. And people were walking up and down and exercising and whatnot. And you go down that trail and then you get to a point and there's a bridge. This bridge that Mr. McClellan was talking about, big scary bridge, and you'll see photos of it. When you get to that bridge, you can make a choice. Back then it was easier than it is now, that you could get on that bridge and walk forward and just go straight to the other end. And those girls got on that bridge probably around 2:05 is what the evidence will show. Mr. McClellan is correct. When they got on the bridge at 2:07, and by the way, they passed Betsy Blair. You're going to find that out. Betsy Blair will say, as she was traveling this way, the girls were traveling this way, and they passed one another. And the girls got on the bridge and then went down here. Now the bridge is long and it's high. It's very long and it's dangerous. As Mr. McClellan said, there's holes in it. It's kind of nothing that teenagers would do probably, and the girls walking on it. When they were about close to halfway across the bridge, one half of the way, you'll see Abby was ahead over here, and she turned back and took a photo of Abby heading this way, heading to the south end of the bridge where the abduction happens. And you'll see Abby there. And that happened at 2:07. So we kind of have an idea where the girls were at 2:07. 2:13 is when the abduction happened. So we know at 2:13 they're at the end of the bridge. So what happened then? Well, that's caught on video. This video you'll watch, and what you're going to see on that video, it's not very panoramic. You're going to be able to see what everything is and where everything is and who is there. And you do hear this voice, girls down the hill. Police will have to admit that the guy on the video, you don't see his mouth moving. You're not able to be sure who's the guy is that's uttering those words. You're not going to be able to know whether there are more than one person at the end of the bridge. So what will you see on this video? Again, let me describe that the end of the bridge for you that you'll see in evidence. If I'm walking all the way to the end of the bridge like the girls Abby and Libby did, you have a choice, and you're going to see this on the video. You can go left or you can go right. And it looks like on the video that the girls head this way, okay? And if that's the bridge and you head this way, there's one way down. That's a steep incline about 30 foot down the hill. Okay? I don't think the evidence, they're going to be able to show that those girls actually went down that hill or not. They may have, the evidence may show that, in your opinion, or it may show that they went straight. Or the evidence may show that they ended up going down this lesser of an incline on the other side of the bridge. And the bridge is about this wide. There's a lesser graded slope that takes you down, but though The more steep side and the less steep side take you down and funnel you down to an access road about 30 feet away. An access road that some might call it a driveway. But what you're going to hear about is a guy named Brad Weber. This is his property, and this is Brad Weber's way to get to his property. He has two ways. There's that way, and there's another way. To get to Brad Weber's house from this access road, the one way, let me go back over here to where the bridge is. On the right side, where the girls were, and you go down the hill, and then that access road goes up under the bridge, and it goes that way, and it goes way up to Brad Weber's house. So you can imagine that under the bridge. The state of Indiana will not be able to disprove that there was a vehicle down there or that there were other people down there. And we happen to believe that the evidence will suggest that those girls may have gotten into a vehicle at that point in time. Again, we happen to believe that the evidence will suggest that those girls may have gotten into a vehicle at that point in time. There's not going to be strong evidence about what happened at that point in time. I'm just telling you that. You can take from the information, though, from the hard data on Liberty's phone and some other information and data you may see from other sources. Here's what we do know. Liberty's phone was connecting to the tower and receiving text messages. Where are you? What's going on? Voicemails, telephone calls, connecting to the tower, all the way up to 5:44 p.m. It's going to be important in that time frame for you all. 5:44 p.m. No connection to the tower all the way until 4:33 a.m. when it reconnected to the tower, where the phone came back into an area where it connected to the tower again. So for about 12 hours, close to 10 hours, that phone did not connect to the tower. This phone, by the way, by their theory, the state's theory, was under Abby's body the entire time. You also find out that after 4 o'clock, when they say Richard Allen never came back to the scene, he left and never came back, their theory, he didn't take the phone with him. That's what they're telling you, that after 4 o'clock, human hands handle that phone. Richard Allen was at home and he never came back. That's the evidence. You also hear something about what are called exigent circumstance pings. You may have seen on television, in movies and things like that, where somebody is lost and they called AT&T in this case and said, hey, will you try to see if that phone's in the area? And that happened here. And consistent with what we know from the phone itself, the last time that that phone connected, according to exigent circumstance ping, the last time that Liberty's phone connected with the tower on the 13th, Monday the 13th, was what time? 5:44 p.m. That will be something you will hear. Every 15 minutes, that phone was being pinged, and every 15 minutes, it was showing that it's not connecting with the tower. The last time it did, 5:44 p.m. So at 7 o'clock p.m., 7:15 p.m., 7:30 p.m., they're all at different times. These aren't exact, but it was roughly 15-minute increments. That phone is not connecting with the tower. Around 10 o'clock, you will find out that Steve Mullen, he's a law enforcement officer that will be a witness in this case. He contacted a guy named Mitch Blotcher with the state police. Mitch Blotcher was the guy who knows about phone pings and how to analyze them. Steve Mullen wrote up the report about what Mitch Blotcher concluded. He concluded that either the phone had not been connecting with the tower since 5:44 p.m. He concluded the phone had not been connecting with the tower since 5:44 p.m. So either the phone is no longer in working condition or it's out of the area. We know, and you're going to find out, that the phone was in working order when it was found. If it was in working order, so take that one down. If it's left with the phone out of the area. That phone was supposed to be under Abby's body. So again, you'll learn then midnight, 12:15 a.m., 1 a.m., the phone is not connecting to the tower. And then at 4:33 a.m., and we're not going to be able to tell you, I don't think the evidence will. Nobody will ever know exactly when that phone, where it was, when it reconnected or did connect with the tower. Of course, the defense is saying that the phone was out and that it came back in. What we will tell you is that at some point in time after that phone came back into the area, and that was probably after 4:33 a.m., and you're going to find out at 4:33 a.m., you know, when you're in a building and you try to text somebody and there's too many walls and you walk outside and then you start getting texts and the texts start. At 4:33 a.m., 15 text messages and then other text messages matriculated, populated into the phone once it connected with the tower. You're going to find that out. And at some point in time, and I don't think the evidence will be able to, I mean, at some point after that, after the thing with the phone, somebody killed those girls and somebody put that phone under the body where it was then found around noon a few hours later. We are obviously telling you that the evidence will be that those girls were not where they were found on the 14th. They were not there on the 13th. And this will be a big help. There's other evidence that would also suggest, other evidence out there that would also suggest that the girls were not there on the 13th. Yes. So you're going to find out that there was a search party assembled very quickly. It wasn't in Libby's nature. I think it was Becky Patty will tell you this. It wasn't in Liberty's nature not to be late like she was. So the family, very close family, they got together right away and said, "This isn't right. We got to do something." So you're going to find out that they started they sprung into action very quickly and they got a search party together. And it grew and grew, Facebook and stuff like that. And they got on Facebook and said, "Hey, the girls are missing." And you're going to hear from former Fire Chief Sterrett. And he's going to tell you that he's going to tell you about his part on the search party. There were 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys. And here's where they searched for those girls on the 13th. And when those bodies, according to their theory, should be there, well, I think this end of the bridge is where it happened. If those bodies were where the girls were abducted, where the girls were abducted, and you can go down the hill, Sterrett and his people that were with him, they searched this side. The bodies, by the way, were over there. This is where they were. Sterrett and his people searched over here. And then they came over here and they searched over here for 4 hours in this area. And the girls were across the creek. And one thing you're going to find out is it's not very far from that end of the bridge to where the girls' bodies are found across the creek. It's kind of like that way from the edge. So if they went down the hill and they were found at least probably less than 300 yards, it's about 800 feet, not very far. And that's an angle. And what Sterrett will tell you is my people that I was with, and they were spread out and they were looking on this side. Well, they weren't on that side that the bodies were, but what they did see on the side where the bodies were, people with flashlights on that side. And not one person saw any bodies over there because the defense theory is the bodies weren't there. They were somewhere else. And you're going to find out in a little bit about that area. Probably a lot more than you want to, maybe. The areas where the girls were found. It's flat. It's a natural place for people to be walking with flashlights. Now, Sterrett, I don't want to oversell, but Sterrett's not going to be able to tell you the flashlights were there where the bodies were for sure because he doesn't know, but he just saw flashlights over there. You're going to also find out, Mr. McClellan talked about it a moment ago, there's clothing in the creek, okay? And that's going to be important. One thing you're going to find out is the people that were searching, they were preparing for the worst. That maybe the girls were in the creek. Maybe they were floating on top of the water. Many people were going to the creek bed looking for the girls. Now, if the state's theory were true, that clothing off the girls were found on the 14th should be in the creek where the people were searching with their flashlights. And nobody saw any clothing on the 13th in the creek. It was only until later that they saw clothing in the creek. As an additional piece of evidence that you will have to show that the girls were there on the 13th. And is there anything else? Yes. Jerry Holman will tell you that from where the girls were found on the bridge, you can hear voices. Around the time that their theory is that Richard Allen abducted those girls, there would be people walking on the bridge. 4 people, you'll hear from them: Daniel Pearson, Shelby Hicks, Cheyenne Mills, Shelby Duncan. 2 of them went to this end of the bridge. Again, the bodies are over this way. 2 of them were at this end of the bridge. And you're very close, I think. I would call it close to where the bodies were. Again, none of them heard anything. No screams, no voices, no struggles, no wrestling, nothing right around the time when they say Richard Allen was abducting these girls. I mean, if anybody killed those girls, the evidence would show on the 13th, just for that reason alone, there's no sound of anything. The evidence will be those girls were gone. There might be other evidence out there that you guys see individually, but this is a type of case where a jury sees and picks up on things that we don't see. That always happens, especially in longer cases. You guys might pick up on something. So keep your eyes open and your ears, because you're going to see some things. I know I've been going on long and I could go on longer. This is important stuff, and I'm trying to sit down as quickly as I can. But I do want to talk about what I think the state thinks and what they say under oath about bullets, and we'll call it confessions, and the timeline. I want to go through those very briefly. Confessions. You have this and other evidence I've talked about, and none of that stuff matters. So they can put up, and I expect they're just going to put up person after person after person, and video after video after video, and audio after audio after audio after audio of all these confessions of an innocent man. But hard evidence, it doesn't matter that the hard evidence shows otherwise. And you're going to see these videos, and we're going to show you videos of Richard Allen in his cell and how this guy was taken out of his house. As I said in the mini opening, away from his wife of 30 plus years, to a prison where he's standing in his tiny little cell with a bed about this high on the ground and about 2 feet from a toilet, watched 24 hours a day, told that he's a baby killer. He went in there fragile to begin with. You're going to see some video that's upsetting, and it should be upsetting. Even the video of him talking to his stepdad saying, "Don't give me any money, don't hire me a lawyer." You're going to find out even in November, within 2 weeks of him being at Westville, he said, "Maybe I'll just admit all of it so that you guys won't have to suffer." That was at the beginning. When these confessions happened, it was after close to 6 months. 5 to 6 months later, after he endured what he had endured, confessing to shooting those girls in the back, when they weren't shot. The things I told you, you take those confessions for what you think they're worth when you compare it to other evidence. That's what we'll ask you to do. What about these bullets? You're going to hear from psychologists, Dr. Grassi and Dr. Westcott. They're our experts. They're going to tell you that the ingredients were there for false confessions. What Richard Allen endured. What about the bullet, the magic bullet, as one witness called it? Here's what you're going to find out. First of all, unless I see something I haven't seen before, and maybe even just missed it if it existed, maybe these photos exist, I haven't seen them. There's a magic bullet in the ground, they say, right here. As you see some of the photos of that bullet as it's in the ground, maybe they will produce those, but I haven't seen them. There's not a video of this important. This is one of their main pieces of evidence. There's no video or photographs of that bullet being taken out of the ground and photographed. from the angle and that angle, from this angle and that angle and that angle and that angle. Just a photo of the bullet in the ground. And then later, a different, a different photograph of a bullet at the lab where it's tested. But in between, I didn't see anything else. So you're going to find out about this magic bullet that law enforcement commonly use 40 caliber bullets. Guns that use 40 caliber bullets, even 6 hours, very common. That's the gun they found at Richard's house. It's a very common gun. Law enforcement uses 6 hours, 40 caliber bullets. So you would think, okay, let's test to find out whether it's police walking around. As they're walking around the area, did they drop a bullet? Let's see if that happened. Hey, I want every police officer that was out at that crime scene walking around, I want to know what kind of gun they had if they're missing any bullets. You think that would happen, but it did not happen. You think they would say, I want every 40 caliber handgun that police had tested. You think that would happen, but it did not happen. You're also going to find out that Brad Weber, remember that guy? He's a guy whose driveway goes all the way up to his house. He had a 40 caliber 6 hour in his vehicle, and that handgun was tested, and it was not excluded as the weapon, okay? And what you're going to find out about the test itself, we have an expert named Dr. Warren. He's going to be very, very critical of the way that this weapon, that this testing was handled. Here's the way it was handled. This is what you'll find out. The bullet that they got out of the ground had markings on it that you can see. This is important. This bullet, Mr. McClelland talked about this a bit. It was never shot. It had never been shot out of a gun. It had been cycled through a gun. Does it make sense? And it had sufficient markings, this bullet did. So what they did then is law enforcement took a pristine bullet and put it in Richard's gun, and they cycled it through to create how that bullet was when they came to find it. And when they took that pristine bullet after it had been cycled and they looked at it, at some of the markings were insufficient. They just couldn't be seen well enough. And they're trying to compare that bullet to this bullet that did have sufficient markings. That's the starting point of the problems with this bullet. So what did they have to do? They had to then, law enforcement, they really wanted to work this out. They really wanted to force this bullet to fit. So they fired this bullet. So there's more pressure on it, and the tools and the things inside can show more markings. So now they're comparing a bullet that was fired out of a weapon. Now it has sufficient markings to at least see it. They're comparing that bullet to the bullet that was found in the ground that had insufficient markings. Now this bullet has sufficient markings, and now they're going to tell you, oh yeah, they're the same bullet. It's comparing apples to oranges. That's what you're going to hear. By the way, and look at it. You have eyeballs. When you see these comparison photographs, your own eyeballs will tell you that these don't match. Your own eyeballs. You don't need expert folks because you have eyes. You also hear things. I don't want to get too muddled down. You're going to hear about subclass. Any gun, let's say a 6 hour that fires a weapon, it's going to have similar tool markings. That's what they call it on each individual bullet. But they're going to be similar subclasses. And there's going to be some of that going on here too. These bullets are consistent in some ways because they come from, a gun that was similar. And these subclasses, Mr. Rozzi will be handling all of the ballistics, and he'll be telling you why that's important and why that shows this magic bullet is really of no value. You also hear from Melissa Oberg, the state's witness. She no longer works. I'm sorry. I know people might have to go to a restroom. I'm going to go as quickly as I can. I'm sorry. Melissa Oberg. She will tell you that she no longer works with the Indiana State Police. She's the one that tested these bullets. And it's the one that's and is the one that's interpreting the evidence, quote unquote, of these bullets. And you'll hear her say this: when I did this over 1,000, over 1,100, 1,300 times, and when people, I was never wrong. Now, the people I worked with, I would check their workout and their work, they were wrong, but I was never wrong. That's the person that's interpreting the bullet. You'll hear her testify. They've got a magic bullet, and we've got other evidence. I'm going to quickly go through the timeline, and then, I'm sorry, this is important, but we'll talk about Betsy Blair again. Betsy Blair, so the hard thing that they can try to say, I'm sorry. So the third thing that they can try to say is that they have this timeline on their side. And the evidence will not support that, the timeline. Betsy Blair gets to the trails around 1:49 p.m., right before Kelsey drops off the girls, right? So Kelsey drops them off at the Mears entrance. They go onto the trail. Betsy goes on the trail. She walks the trails. She gets to where the high bridge starts. When you see all the evidence, this will start to make sense. It's hard to conceptualize it right now, but the trail ends there and the bridge begins. And when she got to where the bridge begins, she saw with her own eyes from about 50 feet away a guy who they're claiming is Bridge Guy. What they failed to tell you, the state, is that the person that Betsy Blair observed was in his early 20s, maybe 30s. He had fluffy brown hair. Richard Allen has kept his hair short since 1989. His wife will tell you about it. He was in the military and he likes it short. And he obviously ain't 20 years old. Rick is short. Betsy Blair did not say the guy was short. That's the guy they say is the killer. I told you about the car that Betsy Blair saw. It doesn't fit the description of Richard Allen's car. Totally different. The timeline will be a problem. Sarah Carbaugh, see, one way to kind of easily understand who these witnesses are, and I know it's hard right now, but Betsy Blair is at the beginning. I'm seeing them like bookends. Betsy Blair, the person that she saw, they say is Richard Allen, the 20-something-year-old guy with brown, poofy hair. That's at the beginning. Sarah Carbaugh's at the very end. They're bookends. They're supposed to be the same guy, according to their theory. So this Sarah Carbaugh, who did she see? She's going to testify. I think you're going to like her, but her story is just completely inconsistent. That's what you'll see. In 2017, in June of 2017, she was interviewed and she said that the guy she saw, and they failed to tell you this, she said the guy she saw had a tan jacket on and was muddy. In 2019, 2 years later, after the video's been out, the photos have been out, her story is now 2 years later. No, well, she just said the guy I saw had a blue jacket on and was muddy. Now he was muddy and bloody, just like a pig had been slaughtered. Her story's completely changed. And you'll have to take her testimony for what you think it's worth. But if Betsy Blair did not see Richard Allen, then their theory is falling apart. And you can conclude there's reasonable doubt that she saw Richard Allen. And you'll know what to do. If Sarah Carbaugh did not see Richard Allen, or you don't trust her testimony, then that'll be reasonable doubt. And also, if they didn't see the same person, the person they describe are two different people, and they're saying it's the same person, Richard Allen, their timeline would not work. Other stuff that's important. This is why I've labeled it DNA. Richard Allen, no DNA at the scene, not connected in any way. Social media on Richard Allen, no connection to the girls, no connection to the scene, no connection to any of that business. Forensic data, none of that connecting Richard Allen to anything. I've talked about the hair on Abby's hand. 7 years? I mean, really? I mean, what you're going to find out, it's taken them 7 years to figure out whose hair is on her hand and whether it's family or not. They're scrambling right now. Here's another thing you're going to find out. Dr. Kaur is a guy who conducted the forensic pathology. He's the forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsies. He's going to tell you that it looks like they were two blades used on the girls' necks. A serrated blade, and a non-serrated blade. And they're going to tell you that Richard Allen claimed he killed those girls with a box cutter at some point. Serrated blade and non-serrated blade. That can indicate two people, is what the defense will tell you. Two different people using two different knives. There's evidence of that, and that's what the evidence is. Two people or more. I'm not even talking about the crime scene. I'm not going to do that to you. I think we all need to take a break, but when you see the crime scene, you're going to understand that it is highly unlikely that one person could have done everything that was done to those girls and surrounding and around those girls. It's a very bizarre scene. Very bizarre. There's sticks laid across the girls. There were sticks on those girls. It's a scene that you will see and you'll have to make a decision about whether or not one person can do that. You're going to find out from the evidence that they didn't think that one person could do this or do all of that until Richard Allen was arrested. Who's they? Tobe Lesenby, the sheriff then. He thought it's going to take more than one person to do all that. Tony Liggett. Who else? Tony Liggett. You'll need more than one person. And there might be other people, other law enforcement, that get up and testify that it was more than one person, that it would take more than one person. Richard Allen is innocent. He's really innocent. Whoops. Jesus. Okay, sorry. Okay, here we go. I'm ready. So that was Mr. Baldwin's opening argument. And now we're going to dive into Brad Rozzi's closing argument, the defense's closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've been here for almost a month now. By my count, 17 days of testimony, evidence, over close to 60 witnesses, I think, by my count. 200 to 300 pieces of evidence, exhibits, videos. And you've had the chance to consume all of those things. And today is a day for an opportunity for the lawyers to try and summarize our theories of the case. The defense trusts that what you heard over the last several weeks in terms of the words that came out of the witnesses' mouths in the form or the way that they said those things, and their consistency in their testimony is really more important than what you're going to hear today. But it's a nice opportunity to try and summarize these things. And I would suggest to you that there's been four main themes in what we've heard over the course of the last 17 days. The first one is a broken timeline. The second one is bungled ballistics. The third one is false confessions. And the fourth one is digital forensics, raw data that speaks the truth. Now, one of the other themes that has reared its head over the last 3 weeks is one that you can't really plan for on the defense side, at least before you walk into these courtrooms, because you don't really know what you're going to get from the opposing party, in this case, the state of Indiana. What you've gotten undisputed over 17 days is a theme about what they don't want you to hear. This may be the most important theme in the entire case, is what they didn't tell you. It's what we had to tell you time and time and time again. Witness after witness, exhibit after exhibit. We had to do their job. And let's just think about a few of those things as we get off and running. First one that comes to mind is their refusal to have the height analysis done on the 43-second video. The refusal to have the height analysis done on the video. We heard early in this case they found an expert. They could have spent some money and chose not to, because they were concerned about the variation in the height, maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 inches. I don't recall exactly what the testimony was. Again, I trust the 12 or 15 of you to look at your notes and remember that. They could have had some ranges. They could have maybe ruled out some individuals, but they chose not to do that height analysis. And they chose not to tell you that. The second thing that comes to mind, hours and hours and hours of video lost. Video interviews lost during a critical time period shortly after these crimes in 2017. We brought to your attention through the testimony of Officer Mullen. The third thing we did, this Ford Focus, 2016 Ford Focus. Somebody asked a question, an astute juror. They ran down and did a BMV search in the middle of the trial, not 6 months ago, not a year ago, not 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 or 5, while in trial. And then they offer you up a part of the story again. In order to tell the whole story, we have to offer up the rest of the exhibit, what they don't want you to know. Brad Heath's story may not be the biggest piece of evidence in this case, but I think it's good that you would know that a man who drives in that area of the Hoosier Harvest Store on a routine basis noticed something unusual that day. A car had been parked just next to the CPS building from the morning till the late afternoon. So unusual that he noticed it. We told you that. Betsy Blair's story. The state put her on the witness chair. They asked her only questions they wanted to ask to elicit only the responses they wanted to elicit, but they didn't tell you the rest of the story. We did through cross-examination. A youthful man, I think she said boyish looking, brown, poofy hair, not short. They also didn't tell you about the vehicle she saw at Hoosier Harvest Store when she left. That was entirely inconsistent with the 2016 Ford Focus. And then we've got Sarah Carbaugh. I got to take a breath before I talk about her. She too did not tell the whole story until cross-examination. And what you found out is entirely inconsistent with the state's references earlier today that she saw a muddy, bloody man on 300 North on February 13th. In fact, what we know is at first she saw a muddy man. I think 11 times is the first statement, which was shortly after the deaths of these two girls. And then after that, she was interviewed again Several weeks, maybe even a month or two later. Excuse me for not having all the dates memorized. She reported in that interview she saw a bloody man, a man who had a tan jacket, until they showed her the photo of Bridge Guy, and then she changed her story. Oh, maybe it was blue. They conflate these two words, muddy and bloody, and they're often running. Now, there's an instruction that you're going to get. And I actually think the judge may have read it earlier that basically says that if you are the judge of the credibility, that you are the judge of the credibility of the witnesses. I'm just going to plant this in your brains for the rest of this morning. You may discount the testimony of a witness altogether. And in our business, we actually have a phrase for this. It's not one that gets used often, but it's the concept of incredible dubiosity. Those are kind of big words, but basically what it means to lawyers is that when you hear testimony or receive evidence that is so preposterous and so hard to believe that you should just discount it entirely. Sarah Carba, in her testimony, we put in the incredible dubiosity box. It means nothing. But for the purposes of our discussion today, it's what they didn't tell you about. David McCain. They didn't even bother to bring David McCain in on their case in chief. We called him. David said he was on the trail sometime between 2 and 3, depending on whose version or what part of the testimony you want to believe, but a very believable man. He's out taking photos on that day on the trail between 2 and 3 o'clock. He spent no less than half an hour on that bridge. They didn't tell you about him because it doesn't fit their narrative. Shelby Hicks, Cheyenne Hooligan Mills, 2 more witnesses that were out on that trail that day. Shelby Hicks, by way of her testimony, sometime probably between 2:30 and 3:30, maybe even a little later. Cheyenne Hooligan Mills, by way of her testimony, probably got there, I think she said around 2:50. Again, you can check your notes. Left sometime around 4 o'clock. I think there was a timestamp photograph of 3:49 p.m. of she and Miss Duncan on the north side of the bridge on their way back. The state didn't offer one of those witnesses up. Rick's version of the route that he said he traveled on that day, Officer Mullen got up here earlier and he tried to put Rick on the route that fits best for them. But in fact, we learned in cross-examination that route is not consistent with Rick's story. That Rick actually told them he didn't know actually which way he went. They didn't tell you that. The 2 statements, the 2 interrogations, the first interrogation on October 13th, the second one on October 26th, it wasn't until Mr. Baldwin tried to introduce those statements that you saw them. And I suggest to you that when you go back and deliberate, if there's one piece of evidence or 2 pieces of evidence in this case that you might want to use to exercise your common sense and your judgment, it might be those 2 pieces. Sit down and watch those 2 interviews or statements. Digest what's being said, how it's being said, the tone of what's being said, and ask yourselves, how did Rick Allen handle the situation? One of the most stressful situations a human could ever be in front of, being interrogated for the murder of 2 girls. But you weren't going to see that until we put it in. Now, Brad Weber's lab results from his gun, a Sig Sauer P239 40 caliber collected from his home, could not be excluded as the gun that cycled that round. You have the exhibit. You can see it for yourself. We introduced that into evidence. The photo from Brad Weber's garage, introduced just a few days ago, taken shortly after the murders, where on the floor you see some sticks Seems pretty elementary in most cases, but clearly in this case, the significance of sticks in an odd place is noteworthy. A man who lives just across the creek from the crime scene, we offered that evidence, not them. Brad Weber's statement to police today again, you heard that he said he drove home that day. But what you hadn't heard until the testimony from Officer Goatee and ultimately Brad Weber himself, that he actually interviewed with Agent Pohl and Goatee back in 2017, shortly after the murders. And he told them, in fact, he did not go home that day, that he ran his ATM route. You heard that from us. The April 3rd phone calls. Today, again, the state tees up one phone call in a series of three. The middle call, April 3rd at 5:14 a.m. We're going to get back to that in a few minutes. They tee up that phone call. What you don't know from Harshman's testimony is there was one before that. You might find it suspicious that you didn't hear those phone calls. Why not offer up some truth, some context to you? Why not tell you the whole story? Question: what is it about those phone calls? We'll be getting to that later. The FBI parting ways in the middle of this investigation, not offered up by the state. But when Superintendent Carter got up here a week or so ago and recounts that there were issues separating, the sticks were not recovered, the blood at the crime scene initially, I think Officer Doolin actually testified that he went back out several days later and he had to ask them to come back out and collect those items. We offered that information up. State did not. The videos from Westville. 13 months, this man, this innocent man, this pretrial detainee, he sat isolated in a cell in that prison without choice, 13 months. And all they want to talk about is what he said after he sat in there for 6 or 7 months with absolutely no human interaction of any material substance, having been shackled every time he stepped out of that cell to go visit his therapist, take a shower, or see a doctor. All they want you to do is hear some words in a transcript or words on a recording. You must ask yourself why they wouldn't want you to see the truth. We all did that. You need context. You need truth. And then Miss Ilberg, these infamous photos, the magic bullet. This magic bullet, as the defense calls it, was collected and clearly was the catalyst for Rick's arrest. You saw those statements. Officer Holman's entire statement on October 26 was intensely focused on the results from that examination. They're trying to use that leverage to get Mr. Allen to admit guilt. The importance of that unspent casing is really a big part of the state's case, if not the majority of their case. Because with that, Mr. Allen's not in jail. But what happened when they brought their lab analyst in? Miss Olberg sat in here and she talked a lot. She talked a lot. And at the end of the day, basically what we got from them was, hey, she drew a conclusion. You should just believe her because she's worked at the lab for 17 years. And oh, by the way, why don't you just ignore the work product she generated? And in fact, not only did they not offer these photographs up, they objected when we tried to. Use your common sense. And then finally, this digital phone data. Just in the last couple days, we heard a lot of information about celebrite dumps and other types of extractions. But what the state didn't tell you was that at 5:45 p.m. on February 13th, there was an audio output start note on the state's own timeline that demonstrated that someone plugged that phone into an accessory. And in fact, if you look at the Cecil report, or I think it's the Celebrite report that you have in evidence, you'll see it actually notes on there that it was headphones. They didn't tell you about that. 10:32 p.m., audio output, same situation. They didn't tell you about that either. And finally, the 4:33 a.m. In fairness, maybe there was some discussion about that, but the explanation for that not offered up by the state. You should question the credibility of this investigation because of the things they're not telling you. There's also the chapter of desperation that unfolded over the last 3 weeks. First example is the magic bullet. They got that round, interrogated Mr. Allen, and immediately arrested him right after that interrogation on the 26th, and this thing moved forward. There was also that van, the one unique fact that they had mined out of months and months of therapy notes, hundreds of hours of videos, hundreds of minutes of phone calls, maybe thousands. The van, that one unique fact. And what do we find? That just recently they were running searches, talking to Brad Weber, trying to figure out a way to retrofit that fact into the narrative. When Mr. Weber testified, you may have remembered he was contacted by investigator Mullen, who basically said it was a cold call to him. They wanted to bring him in to talk, but it was interesting that Mr. Weber himself indicated that he generated some text messages to prove his case before he got to the police department. Didn't see those text messages, not part of the evidence. In the middle of that desperation trying to fit the van into this puzzle, you didn't hear about that 2017 interview with Goatee and Agent Pohl, where he had said he was somewhere else that day. And in fact, Mr. Weber actually testified that he normally drives his Subaru to work and he does not often go home after work. They're all facts elicited by the defense. The vehicle search, again, more desperation. The vehicle search of the 2016 Ford Focus, which happened while this trial was unfolding. 7 years to figure that out. Happened just a week or two ago. DNA. We saw that. They tested some DNA a week or two before trial started. Hair strands in Abby Williams' hand at the crime scene. Items that were collected 7 years ago. Still trying to figure it out. Desperate. The admission of internet searches. There were some searches offered up by the state Mr. McClellan mentioned earlier. October of 2022. Searches, he says, by Mr. Allen. There's no proof, in fact, that Mr. Allen did any of those searches. The state put in an affidavit that said it had come from an email account registered to Mr. Allen. They're molding these facts into a favorable scenario, but it's just not consistent with the evidence that you have. Be that as it may, someone in Delphi is searching on the internet about the Delphi murders. If that's the case, we're going to have to convict half of the citizens of Carroll County. Searches for the killing of a sacred deer, a movie? If that's the case, we're going to have to convict half the people in Carroll County. They're desperate. And then the other day, during one of the breaks, having realized that the 545 and 1032 transactions on that phone about the headphone jack being plugged in and out, realizing those existed, Officer Cecil ran downstairs, did a quick Google search, came up here and tried to offer you up some fast food, a Google search. The same kind of search that he said he normally doesn't rely upon when he conducts investigations. Desperation. Absolute desperation. And then maybe the ones the one that sticks out on the most, Dr. Roland Core. It's really hard to forget Dr. Core's testimony in this case because of this one absurdity. He testified when I deposed him earlier this year, I think it was March. He acknowledged that at the scene there may have been more than one murder weapon, straight edges and serrated edges. He said nothing about anything in particular. And then we find that in between the time I took his deposition and the time he testified, he walked into his garage and all of a sudden, ta-da, might be a box cutter. Of all the things on the planet that just popped into his mind, box cutter. But what did you find out? He's had 3 meetings since I deposed him in March with the prosecutor, Nicholas McClellan. 3 meetings with the prosecutor since I deposed him in March. This man has testified over 200 times. I think he said 7,000 autopsies. He's been in a courtroom all over the place. I think he said even in Montana recently, or testified in a case in Montana. No supplemental record? Nothing? No reference to, hey, I might have changed my mind about a material fact? This is desperation at its finest. Timeline. Let's talk about broken timelines. Now, there really are 3 times the state here has offered up in the matter. The 213 video is one of their bookends, if you will. The 355, 357 time, which is consistent with what they say Sarah Carbaugh saw, this image of whatever she saw on 300 North. And let me suggest this. It would not be entirely unreasonable to go back in that room and think to yourself, I don't know if she saw anything. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, 213, 357, those are bookends. And in the middle of that, you have this 232 time, which is when the state suggests that this phone was silent, no longer functioning. By their theory, that phone was where it was recovered on the 14th around noon under Abby's body, laying on the ground. Now, their timeline is dependent upon 2 people, not to belabor the point, but one of those being Betsy Blair, who saw a youthful man who looked boyish in his 20s or 30s, poofy brown hair, didn't seem short. Now, one of those things are consistent with, none of those things are consistent with 5'5" Richard Allen. Why? It may be because she saw somebody else. Sarah Carbaugh, not going to waste any more time on her. Her description was worthless at best. At worst, created by offering her up a photo of Bridge Guy and then asking her what she saw. You know, in our business, from time to time, we will see photo lineups where it's kind of like in the movies. The police will be looking for the suspect and maybe there's an eyewitness. They'll put up, typically 6 or 8 individuals in a lineup and they'll ask the witness to look at it and identify somebody. And the reason why is because if you put one face on there or 2, then ask, you're just more likely to get the answer you want. It's called suggestivity. In this case, that's what happened with Sarah Carbaugh, at the very least. Now, why is David McCain, Shelby Hicks, or why are David McCain, Shelby Hicks, Cheyenne Hooligan Mills all important in his timeline? Mr. McCain arrived between 2 and 3. He said he was out on the trail an hour or more. if I recall correctly, at least 30 minutes on the bridge at some point taking photos. And we know from the evidence that he was there before Shelby Hicks arrived. So you've kind of got three stages of individuals arriving on the bridge that day between 2 and 4 o'clock, the 2 and 4 o'clock hour. David McCain, Shelby Hicks, Daniel Pearson, Cheyenne Hooligan, Shelby Duncan. And what we know is McCain was there first. He stood on the bridge on a day where I think Pat Brown and Jake Johns identified as having been a very nice day. One of them mentioned the sound. They could hear people on the bridge when they were down near the crime scene where the girls were found. And this was on the 14th, but it gives you some idea of how well sound travels in that area. As the crow flies, not at all far from the top of the bridge to where those girls were at rest. McCain stood on the bridge, heard nothing, saw nothing. Shelby Hicks said she thought she arrived around 2:30. She remembered at some point taking a phone call from her dad. My recollection is that the phone call came sometime after 3, shortly after 3 o'clock. She said she was almost there when that phone call came in. Down the Mears connector to the right, the phone call came in. She went back towards High Bridge with Mr. Pearson, past Mr. McCain. So, in time and sequence, she and Mr. Pearson were second. They sat on the bridge. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. Cheyenne Hooligan shows up with Shelby Duncan around 3 o'clock, maybe 2:50, goes straight to the bridge. They walk all the way across the bridge to the south side. They got timestamps on their phone. They used the restroom on the south side of the bridge, walked back across the bridge to where Hicks and Pearson formerly were. 3:49, I think, was a timestamp on that picture when they were sitting on a platform, I think smoking a cigarette. They heard nothing, saw nothing. Dr. Kaur, the medical examiner, said from a medical standpoint, it's possible that each of those girls could have lived from anywhere to 5 to 20 minutes with those injuries. Vocal cords are not severed. Able to talk, able to scream, able to make noise. Again, Dr. Kaur said from a medical standpoint, it's possible each of those girls could have lived anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes with their injuries. Vocal cords not severed. Able to talk, able to scream, and make noise. Despite all of that, no one saw anything. No one heard anything. Not a peep. The possibility of multiple actors in this case. The state has completely ignored this possibility. They don't even want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it at all. It doesn't fit their narrative. Lots of cars and people on the trail that day. We heard testimony about that. The distinct possibility that somebody could have accessed the bridge from that south side, the Weber side. Teresa Liebert came in here and said she noted something unusual that day. Near her dead-end road, a strange man that was not familiar to her. She couldn't explain. It is plausible that there could have been activity on the south side of the bridge. Activity on the south side of the bridge. Sheriff Lesenby's statement that law enforcement had communicated with each other that at one time they believed there were more people involved. That's the sheriff from 2017. Dr. Kaur's timeline and testimony regarding the potential for multiple weapons. All of these things lend to the possibility of multiple actors. But what's the reality of this? Again, on the common sense side of this. On February 13th, if you accept their theory as entirely accurate, you would know that those girls were ushered down the hill, through the woods, across a creek, undressed, wounds inflicted on one of the girls, while the perpetrator or perpetrators, in this case, one person believed it's Richard Allen, was controlling the other girl, wounds inflicted on the second girl, Abby Williams, then redressed, sticks retrieved, placed in an unusual formation on the girls' bodies, and then the perpetrator flees. A very labor-intensive crime scene. 213 to 232 by their standards. That suggests the possibility of multiple actors, even if you believe their theory. They all say this was done by a 5'5" man, done without a single detectable sound, without a trace of DNA evidence at that crime scene. The prosecutor asked you during jury selection in Fort Wayne to exercise your common sense. Now is that time, and common sense will dictate that it's just implausible that that could have happened in a short period of time. What do we know about Mr. Allen's actions in February 2017? Well, within a day or two after the girls were found, Mr. Allen called himself out to local law enforcement, picks up a phone, calls the police, says, "Hey, I was out on the trail that day. I'd be happy to help. Where'd you like to meet me?" They end up at Save-A-Lot, talks to Officer Dan Doolin, hands him his cell phone. Officer Doolin records that information. Officer Doolin said during that interview that experienced law enforcement officer that he was, said there was nothing unusual about meeting Richard Allen. Even in 2022, he was cooperative with police. Took him to the station. Sheriff Liggett and I think Investigator Mullen interrogated him. He stood there and he told them he didn't do it. He couldn't explain, and he cooperated. Then on October 26, 2022, knowing at this point that he's a suspect, what does he do? He goes back into the station, cooperates again. And in the face of lies, call it the Reed technique, whatever you want, we all know that's a lie. In the face of those lies about that bullet coming from his gun and his voice being determined to be on the video, and about witnesses IDing him at the trails, he asserts his innocence. And the state wants you to believe that because the tone of his voice changed by one note, that somehow that's evidence of guilt. Insulting. I suggest to you that if somebody was bearing down on you for the murder of two girls, your response might be the same. Then his wife was leveraged to try to get him to come clean. He stood his ground. He said, "I didn't do this. I don't know how this happened. I cannot explain something that I don't know." What other explanation is there? And finally, for 5 years after these girls were found, Richard Allen lived in this community. He worked right down the street at CBS, a place where the public comes in every day. He had a chance to get out of here. He had a chance to lay low, but there was no reason for him to do that because he wasn't responsible for these crimes. The magic bullet. Let's talk about the magic bullet. A case of bungled ballistics. There were questions about that cartridge from the get-go. Collected underneath some leaves on the ground in the woods, poorly photographed. That cartridge ends up in a lab, And Miss Oberg examines a cartridge and eventually receives the firearm from Richard Allen's house. Now, this is important, and this is kind of second layer stuff. But you did hear about some of this bias, confirmation bias, things of that nature with these exams. It's always good in these examinations to kind of be blind about what you're doing. But in this case, because they had this cartridge way ahead of time, there was some discussion about, hey, this is the kind of firearm it may have been cycled through. We have some ideas. I think some of the testimony was it was a Sig or Smith and Wesson. And so when Mr. Alan Sig Sauer was brought into her, they had already kind of narrowed it down to possibly two different firearms. But what we know is that when Miss Oberg took some stock rounds out of the cabinet, out of their vault, she placed them in this firearm 4 to 6 times. I don't recall exactly. She cycled these rounds, and what we know is the marks on these test cycled rounds were not sufficient to compare with the magic bullet. So what do we get? Apples to oranges. She shoved some test fires in that gun, starts firing away, totally different. Dr. Warren talked to you about that. Higher intensity changes the nature of that environment. Totally different environment. She does that. Not necessarily improperly, but she does that, and she starts off on her examination comparing apples to oranges again. And I would say under pressure and duress from law enforcement. Dr. Warren said that can still be done, but here's the problem. It requires a lot more work, a lot more intensity, a lot more cooperation, a lot more research. You need to explain your work. You need to offer it up. It needs to be vettable. Subclass versus those individual characteristics. I'm not going to bore you with that for the rest of the afternoon, but what we know is that is where the battle lines are drawn in this industry. You got to be able to distinguish between individual characteristics and subclass characteristics, or it's not helpful at all. And in this case, with regard to those 3 tools, the ejector, the extractor, and the barrel hood, she documented her subclass findings only with the ejector. She documented nothing with the extractor and nothing with the barrel hood. And as it turns out, in terms of peer research, error studies, it really isn't any that even exist when you're comparing apples to oranges, cycled versus unfired rounds, unfired versus fired. And then came the photograph discussion. Of all the things that we've heard in this case that should upset you and should cause you consternation and concern about the task that's been placed in front of you are these photographs. They had the hairline down the middle. You can look at the 2 sides. If you're as old as I am, you may remember ant races on TV. To me, I think it's a reasonable person would look at these and say, this is like ant races. I don't even know. But if you believe that these are helpful to you, take a look at these and stare at them and ask yourself, when the hell are the sufficient agreements? Where are the ridges that match? In fact, there's way more that doesn't match than what matches on every single one of these photos, save one. I'll show you that photo in a minute. And again, to the extent you believe there's a match there, you're entitled to your opinion. As my colleague once said, use your eyes and your ears. Use your eyes. See for yourself. I don't know how many you could make any sense out of it. But here's a photo that she took and apparently has no meaning to her evaluation. And then we've got some areas here where there's some similar lighting, but a lot of areas that are different. I don't understand what's going on with that. She took the photo. And then this photo, maybe the most notable photograph in the case, you may recall Miss Oberg herself acknowledging, if you look at this photo, I think the first thing that jumps out at you is that there are some similarities here. There's some ridge lines that are illuminated that are kind of close. But what you also recall from the testimony is both Miss Oberg and Mr. Warren, Dr. Warren, had identified that this is classic subclass characteristics. Miss Oberg said at one point, well, there are some other marks that I'm looking at, but these matching marks, if you will, to the extent you believe they're matching, are classic subclass characteristics. This photograph is actually a really good example of why this is a dangerous business. The science, if you will, I'll concede that you can call it an applied science, although there are distinguished bodies in this country that don't agree with that. But the quote unquote science, if you will, is under fire. There was a laboratory in Rhode Island that was shut down because they weren't distinguishing between subclass and individual characteristics. Just recently, about a month ago, in fact. This is a subjective game. Ms. Oberg sat here and told you, I get to see a motion picture. I get to take the pictures that I want to take, but you should ignore those in this case because they're not important or they're not reliable, they're not valuable, or whatever you want to use. You should just believe me. That's what she told you. And if that's enough for you in a matter of the highest importance, then there's nothing I can do about that. But the question then becomes, why didn't the defense have this bullet examined? An explanation might be that after consulting with Dr. Warren, there was no point in doing that because the work was so poor. It's not our burden of proof to offer up his innocence. It's their job. It's their job. It's their burden of proof. Why wouldn't they get that bullet re-examined after it was in dispute? 7 years they've had it. Just a moment, please. Okay. And then we've got these false confessions. Life in solitary confinement. Rick Allen's situation in this case is unprecedented. The warden himself acknowledged that in 25 years that he worked at the DOC, he was not familiar with a circumstance like this, at least in the last 3 to 5 years. I think he said 5, maybe 3 to 5, that he was working at Westville. He had never had a pretrial detainee without a criminal history in the Westville Correctional Unit. Absolutely unprecedented. Dr. Waller herself acknowledged the same. Mr. Allen's circumstances were unlike any she had ever seen. And I think Dr. Martin even told us the same thing. A man who had been in the prison system in Florida for years. He distinguished between pretrial detainees being held in jail versus those being held in prison, whether they were in a circumstance like Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen was a fragile egg when he landed at the doorstep. There was a little bit of back and forth about whether or not he had a serious mental illness. Well, that was cleared up yesterday. It's a DOC set designation, a business designation, a major depressive disorder. I would suggest that that really is a serious mental illness. Dr. Waller herself admitted it, but it's a business designation. Dr. Westcott said, I think she defined it as a critical mental illness, but that he did have a serious mental illness. He was tossed in the most secure unit in the state of Indiana and treated just like the rest. That's what we heard. He was treated just like the rest. The rest of the convicted murderers that were his cellmates, the rest of the convicted child molesters that were in the unit, the most heinous individuals in the state were his neighbors, and he was treated just like them. In fact, not only was he treated just like them, he was immediately placed on suicide watch. The evidence suggests that no human, no matter how strong, could endure those conditions for that long a period of time without having some kind of a breakdown. Stripped of almost every necessity of a man's life and sent back to a place where you have very few, given a suicide smot, basically a caveman gown. You have to eat off the floor, complete with mice droppings and ants, all the while his neighbors calling him a child killer, a baby killer, telling him to kill himself in an 8 by 12 cell, cinder block walls, concrete floor, no blanket at times, steel toilet next to his where he laid his head at night. And if that wasn't enough, when he got out of his cell 35 times a week to go to rec, he got to go to a similar unit, a similar cell. They call it outdoor rec. It's a cage with a screen on top. I recall asking Warden Gallipo at one point about Rick's opportunities to go to rec. There were rec yards all over the facility, ball diamonds, volleyball courts, basketball courts. He didn't see one, not one time. On top of that, when he got to go to therapy, shackled by his arms, put a box cuff on him, his legs, belly chain, a lead, I call it a leash. Argue about that all you want. He was walked to a cage down the hall where he got to talk to his therapist. Same with the shower. 30-day rule in DOC, the 30-day rule. Here's a point. Solitary confinement is damaging to a man's brain. It doesn't matter if you have a business designation or a safekeeper. As a safekeeper. If you're held in solitary confinement, Dr. Gracian said the international standard was 15 days. But when you're held in solitary confinement, that evidence is firm that eventually you're going to break. You can only handle so much. Rick Allen, more than 30 days. 30 turned to 60. 60 turned to 90. 90 turned to 120. How could I keep doing the math? When the dust settled, he was there for 13 months. How much can one human endure? How much? And they didn't want you to show you the video. They didn't want you to see that. It's insulting. The state's response to this, Trooper Harshman, says he's right where he belonged. They could see that he may have been psychotic. Dr. Walla, I wouldn't put any credence in what she said. Her testimony is he was psychotic from March to April to May to June. They were willing to concede that he may have been psychotic, the state, but they want you to cherry pick that he may have been psychotic. They want you to cherry pick somewhere in the middle. He's psychotic on May 13th, but not on the 14th. So let's take a statement and let's throw that up on the screen and hit play. He's getting stuck with needles during that whole time, all the way into mid-June. Antipsychotics, which means by extension that you're psychotic. They wanted to say he was faking it, but they didn't want to show you his body language when he was saying these things. But as it turns out, Dr. Waller herself said, even after some forethought, hindsight, that she wasn't sure if her note regarding the feigning behavior was accurate. She said, I don't know. Dr. Martin yesterday, after watching the video, on the day when Dr. Martin claimed he was oriented to time and place, then changed his mind right there on the stand. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't possibly watch that video and for 1 second believe that that man was oriented to time and place? What we did find out about the standard at the DOC, or what did we find out about the standard at the DOC when it came to the care of this man? It was to keep him alive, wasn't it? That was the medical standard within which these people were working, to keep him alive. You should be insulted. Dr. Gracian talked on a more technical level about delirium and false beliefs, false memories. A man who's seen this time and time again over 30, 40, 50 years, I've forgotten. I think he said he started practicing in the 70s. False beliefs, false memories. False memories start out as false beliefs, is what the testimony was. They're not based on factual circumstances, actual factual circumstances. They're based on beliefs. I suggest to you to go back to look at April 3rd, 514, phone call. The only one they want you to show you. Go to page 4. At the top, Rick starts the phone call. I did it. You did what? No, I didn't. No, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. And then by the time you get to the bottom of the page, a few lines down, you start to see signs of false belief. No, I mean, evidently did it. because maybe I did it. I think I did it. Then Rick starts to communicate how he thought maybe he called his father earlier. He couldn't remember. Then he says, page 5, line 22, I think I did. Line 24, because I think I did. Page 6, line 1, I wish I could say I didn't. I don't know. I just wish they'd kill me and let me apologize. Those are false beliefs. Dr. Gracian said, classic case. And then there's the iPhone. Libby's iPhone. Apple 6S, I think it was. Does that thing ever have stories to tell? Yes, it does. The state has relied heavily on that and want you to believe that the information they offered about the phone is accurate. There were 3 timestamps on that phone that I already mentioned to you. 5:45 p.m., 10:32 p.m., and 4:33 a.m. How do you interpret that information? I suggest you think about this first. The phone has no personality, no feelings, no emotions, no opinion. It just generates raw data, speaks for itself. One of the most common tools in law enforcement these days in solving crimes. There's one simple conclusion to be drawn by this 5:45, this 10:32 time frame, and that is that someone was using the phone, someone plugging something in. That phone went dead after 4:33 a.m. You heard testimony that there wasn't any activity after that. That makes sense. There wouldn't be any Apple Health activity because it was dead. But we do have Apple Health data from earlier. There's a reference on that to a 20-foot change in elevation. You've got a map of the south side of the bridge. You should revisit that map. David McCain said, and I'm approximating, that the distance between the top of that bridge and the water is about 65 feet, I think is what he said. He knew that place well. He was part of the effort to establish that bridge and that trail. Exercise some common sense. Go to the south side of that map or bridge on the map and look at the Weber Road, and you're going to see it's about halfway down to the river bottom. That private drive, that's about half of 60 feet. That's 30 feet maybe we can approximate. I don't know when 20 goes to 30 on the Apple Health data. I don't know if it's 29:05 that it switches to 30. I don't know. What I can tell you is that the location of that road relative to that 20 feet is curious at best. Not ironically, that private road leads to Brad Weber's home. Not ironically, he had sticks in his garage. Not ironically, he owned a Sig Sauer P30 239 40 caliber that couldn't be excluded as one of the firearms that cycled that round in this case. It's the state burden of proof. It rests squarely on them, not us. And the state has 7 years to figure out that 5:45 at 10:32. There's no explanation because the phone is right. It's right. You need facts. The state wants you to believe that this box cutter that we talked about earlier, that there's this box cutter. Dr. Core's testimony is hard to swallow. The timing, even his tone, and the way that he testified. You can draw your own conclusions about that, but it seems like retrofitting of that particular fact. By the way, a box cutter, it's one of the most common tools on the planet. They searched Richard Allen's house. They wanted you to see all those knives earlier when they put them up on the screen. They wanted you to see those box cutters, but there's not one piece of trace evidence on any of that that connects him with the murders of those girls or that crime scene. They have no proof that he discarded anything, just a statement with no validity. The van comment, again, we know there's a discrepancy in Mr. Weber's statements. It's a van. It's a van. Again, one of the most common vehicles we see on the roadway. God only knows what a BMV search might have shown as to how many vans were in Carroll County in 2017. And then Dr. Westcott had a really not unique, not a unique. She had a really interesting observation when she testified the other day, and it was this. She noted that the medical notes that was her version of her summary of what Rick Allen told her during some of these therapy sessions in the cage that flowed like a story. But for 4 months, the man was in a psychotic state, disorganized speech, fragmented thoughts. No man in the state would talk like that, would be able to provide details like that. But yet these things showed up on paper. Dr. Wallam's circumstances in this case and her involvement in this case are clearly an issue that you need to tackle. The word bizarre comes to mind. The psychologist, I should say, who was infatuated with this particular case, who was assigned to him and didn't disclose her personal interest in this case until after she was assigned to him. She visited the Monon High Bridge. She lives north of Chicago. She works in northern Indiana. It is fair to question the accuracy and authenticity of her work. The unique fact that he lied in wait before those girls were ushered down the hill. Well, look at the video. Does that look like someone who's lying in wait? In fact, they put forth testimony that he was standing on one of the platforms on the bridge earlier, and there was somebody staring at him, Betsy Blair, and that he walked down the trail. If you believe the statements from the state, Voorhees and Wilbur saw him. That's not lying in wait. They then try to retrofit that onto the idea that, oh, in that video, now you can hear the gun cycle. Well, you can play that video again. There's a lot of crunching and munching and a lot of other things you hear. The video's outside. But to fit their theory, they're interpreting one of those crunching sounds as being a gun being cycled. And there's really just no proof of that. None. I should have stuck to that in the desperation. I should have stuck that in the desperation column. And then they wanted you to believe for a few days that Richard Allen was an alcoholic because of one of the statements from May suggested that he drank some beers. And somehow being an alcoholic is consistent with someone who drinks a few beers and go out on a trail. Look at your medical records. I think there's some testimony from Dr. Martin that Richard Allen disclosed to him that he drank occasionally. No references to him being an alcoholic or being an alcoholic. This is desperation. The search for the girls has been called into question. From what we know from Mr. Sterrett is that on February the 13th that there were search crews sent out. And some of them were service personnel, firefighters and such. Others were just lay people trying to help. And we know that the search went in somewhere between 10 o'clock and 2 in the morning. Both sides of the river or the creek. Both sides. Mr. McClelland's argument is they weren't looking for dead girls, so they wouldn't have found them. There were no leaves on trees in February. No leaves on the trees in February 2017. The visibility was great. I think Jake Johns, the other gentleman that was out there, Pat Brown, said that you could see a couple hundred yards. Even at one point, you can check your notes, but basically from close to that cemetery all the way down to where those girls were found. These people had lights, flashlights. They were on foot. Mr. Sterrett said that they were moving hastily, trying to cover a lot of ground. There are a lot of questions about whether or not the girls were there on the evening of the February 13th. The state's theory, back to the theory of lying in wait, is that he was walking with purpose that day, suggesting that Mr. Allen had a plan, that he must have known the girls were on that trail, walking with a purpose. But yet there's not one single item of digital evidence, social media, or any connection whatsoever, whether it be familiar connection, work connection, between this man, anybody else, and those girls, nothing. Now his clothing. Consul says he's wearing the exact same clothes. They collected a Carhartt jacket. Boy, there's a revelation for you. A blue Carhartt jacket in a closet in Carroll County, Indiana. The Hope box. He's got a Hope box, and there's a round in there, and it's a Smith & Wesson 40 caliber. Mr. Doolin testified that Smith & Wesson rounds are very common, one of the most common manufacturers in the industry. You can go back and check your notes, but Oberg had that round. That was closet round number 1, and you can go check your notes, but my recollection is she couldn't generate any comparisons between the cyclings on that round and the cyclings on this one. Consul said earlier that Richard Allen found the Lord. That's why he came clean. In an 8 by 12 cell with no bed sheets, nothing other than a Bible for months, what does a man find? Can you blame him for taking out the Bible? Can you blame him for trying to find a way out of his circumstance? He's not the only guy who's found God in prison. You can rest assured. And then there's a voice on the video. The state says Trooper Harshman identified Rick Allen as the voice in the video. But you heard Investigator Mullen the other day on the stand. Over the course of 5 years of this investigation, phone call after phone call after phone call, tip after tip, people who are calling in and saying, I know this voice. That is Bob Smith, or this is Jerry Smith, or John Doe. Dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds that they know of. And all of a sudden, somehow Trooper Harshman, mind reader, voice expert, is able to identify Richard Allen's voice as the one on that video. Exercise your common sense. Well, speaking of common sense, there is the 10,000 view, 10,000 foot view of this case. And it's simply this. No one identified Richard Allen as the man on the bridge. Not Miss Voorhees, Miss Wilbur, Miss Blair, and sure in hell not Miss Carbaugh. And in fact, if you believe what they said, they were actually identifying people that were not Richard Allen. Number 2, not one piece of digital data from any phone, any tower, any form of social media connects Richard Allen to that crime scene or those girls. Number 3, not one fingerprint, shoe print, or other piece of clothing connects Richard Allen to that crime scene or those girls. Not one scrap of DNA, either on those girls or on any of the surfaces around that scene, connects Richard Allen to those girls or that scene. A very labor-intensive scene. Not one speck of trace material was found on Richard Allen's car. Not on his car or his house that connects Richard Allen to those girls. If you want to believe Sarah Carbaugh, Miss Muddy and Bloody, Miss He Slaughtered a Pig, you bet your bottom dollar when he got in his car, he would have left some trace evidence. That car was collected by police, secured, examined. Even if it's 5 years later in the world we're living in, they would have found something. It's unprecedented in the modern era of law enforcement investigation that they would have no forensic evidence connecting Mr. Allen to that scene. Now, as the judge said, the rules permit me to speak only once on Mr. Allen's behalf. It's been a long haul to get to this point, not nearly as long as the journey that the Williams family has had, or the Germans family, or the Patty family, not nearly as long as the journey the Allen family has had to get to this point, certainly not long as the journey Mr. Allen has endured as he was processed through the doldrums of the DOC. At the end of the day, the state's timeline has crumbled. The magic bullet is nothing more than a tragic bullet. It was a catalyst that landed Rick in the DOC, a terrible place. At the end of the day, they want you to ignore this, that at 5:45, 10:32, and how all of a sudden at 4:33 a.m., by their theory, after the phone had laid under a young lady's body for hours and hours and hours, all of a sudden it received service. Doesn't make sense. The phone has no personality. It's not manufacturing facts, it's raw data. All those things make it virtually impossible that Rick Allen was responsible for these offenses. But let's say for a second that you want to buy into the idea that they've got the smoking gun because Richard Allen confessed to these crimes. Even if you're inclined for a second to consider these claims, consider this. This here is called a rack. It was a tool that was used in medieval times to punish people, even up to the 13, 14, 1500s. Here's a picture of what it might look back in the very early days. There's also a tool called thumb screws, another medieval device that was used to interrogate people. This is what might have looked back like back in the day. But as a society, we've evolved. This ultimately gave way to other forms of interrogation, more subtle ones. One of those forms was throwing somebody in a cell and throwing away the key. It's called solitary confinement, much slower and more painful. A slower and more painful form of punishment and interrogation. Whether intentional, reckless, or negligent on the part of the Department of Corrections, somebody should have spoken up. A team of 4 or 5 doctors, police officers watching these videos every day, the warden visiting the cell. When was somebody going to say, something's wrong here? This ain't right. Where's the moral compass? You're the moral compass. You may have thought we moved away from such harsh practices. Every now and then, our system of justice, we are confronted with circumstances that remind us and redirect us in another direction, another course of action, another way to handle things. That time is now. The power of the state, and it might be a crude example, but it makes a point. Now's the time to step back to the Middle Ages in terms of crime and punishment. Now's the time to step into the ring, to have a voice and to acknowledge that this ain't the way to punish people. No man or woman should be treated like this, whether guilty or innocent. And rendering a verdict of guilt in this case would be endorsing this behavior, this process. You should not do that. We're asking you to set Rick Allen free, and we're asking you to find him not guilty of these crimes. Thank you. And that, my friends, is the completion of Brad Rozzi's argument, which closes this case. And I think if you give that some consideration, you will see that it's a fine argument. And it's bewildering how, when presented with this case, a jury would somehow come to the conclusion of a verdict of guilt with all of the reasonable doubt that was presented, with all of the conflicting witness testimony, the total incompetence of law enforcement, the emotional gaslighting from the state. It's absolutely inconceivable what we've witnessed. And I think you all should consider all of this, particularly in lieu of our current place in time and considering the appellate arguments that we've recently gone through, I think if you were to share any show, it would be the recent show I did on the appellate arguments and this one. And that show was called, let me find it for you guys so I can properly reference it. It's called Delphi, the state's insane appeal response. I think if you want to inform people about this particular case, this show, Delphi, the story told to court, and Delphi, the insane state's response, the insane state's appeal response, these two most recent shows, these are the best shows to show people, to get them up to speed and have them understand the complexity, the atrocious crimes that have occurred in this process. This is not due process. And this jury was not infallible. As a matter of fact, where are the jurors? Because have you noticed with all of the cases that have recently closed and the verdicts that have been reached in the past 2 weeks or a month, have you noticed that all of these high profile cases, there have at least been a couple of jurors come out on each of these cases and speak their minds? Where are our Delphi jurors? Are they ashamed of what they've done? Were they compromised? Were they intimidated? What happened with this jury? And where are jurors? We know for sure that one of them was a fake. Okay? And that person was Lauren Matthias's assistant, who was not a juror, but who pretended to be a juror. Okay? Hoaxed or committed fraud unto the community to push this guilty narrative, this guilter narrative. Laura's assistant, Grayson, came in, presented to a YouTuber that she was a verified juror. The YouTuber presented that she was a verified juror and pushed this guilter narrative. All a lie. And the other juror, the first one to come out through murder sheet, we don't know if that's an actual juror. No one's shown their identity. No one's shown their face. No one has shown proof that they're a juror. Where are our Delphi jurors? And what is it with this rumor about the jury finding out that Richard Allen was communicating with Keegan Kline? Our same jurors who are having barbecues with the police officers. We had YouTubers in the same hotel room with the judge. We had notes being slipped under doors in the hotel rooms. We had jurors going off when they should have been deliberating and having family days and communicating with the entire outside world and who knows who else. What happened with our jury in this case? How do they feel now? Where's their conscience? When will you step forward? This was Delphi, the story told the court. And we're not even going to get into what I referenced in the introduction to the show, how limited this frame was. Remember, they took all of these screenshots as fact. They took screenshots from off the internet to prove proof of life of these girls. Screenshots of the Harvest Store video, not the Harvest Store video. By the way, where's the rest of the Harvest Store video? Are you telling me that that entire day on the 13th and 14th, we couldn't have seen every single vehicle that passed in that whole 48 hours? Why are we picking and choosing to screenshot certain videos off or certain vehicles off that footage? And where are the other cameras at that building? This is bullshit. And you all know it. So I hope that all of you will give this a lot of thought and return. I hope to see you soon. And let's not mention, let's not forget to mention the conflicts of interest here with Stacey Diener and Nicholas McClellan. Okay, go look at those conflicts of interest with their familial relations. Anyhow, I want to thank all of you for being here. Please do support the channel by hitting the thumbs up. Okay, hit the thumbs up for me on the way out of here. Or if you're on the replay watching, please hit the thumbs up. Leave some comments down below in the comment section. I love to hear your input. And if you feel so inclined, support the channel financially. We need your help really big time. I would appreciate your support in this ongoing endeavor. But God bless you all. Thank you so much. And God bless Libby and Abby. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening. With that being said, I'll be out of here and we'll catch you another time. This was Delphi, the story told to court, the opening and closing statements in the trial of Richard Allen from both the prosecution and defense. And I hope that it gives you some good food for thought. God bless.
It's kind of gross and icky. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Pop is a fucking terrorist. A fucking pedophile, sympathizing, fucking terrorist.
This stuff's coming to a close. There are more than one person involved with this case. It's not just Richard Allen. There's several others, and we've all seen them on TV and been interviewed and spoken about way back in the beginning. Law enforcement has known about these people, but they have to methodically do the case.